live, gang. I'm gonna bump this in the Discord as people start filtering in. So, yes, last weekend we had an extended weekend, so we decided to take the week off and give ourselves a little vacation. But we are here. We have the show that we promised you last weekend, and we're going to be discussing the issue of materialism. I think this was, we all love to talk about materialism. I think we can all agree that it's of a great importance that Marxists uphold the philosophy and defend it. And I think it was the Vivek Chibber article that came out maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago that had its rounds on Twitter. And as always, when Vivek has an article on Twitter, there's the peanut gallery always comes around and clowns on him. So we figured maybe let's unpack what Chibber has to say in this article and see what's reasonable, what's not. And I think because the article is claiming to be a defense of materialism as a whole, it segues into a broader defense of a broader question of materialism for the left that I think we all have an interest in defending what is the meaning of materialism. Why should the left be materialists? And I think that also segues into what I kind of wanted to do for the second segment of our show, which is the irrationalism of the MAGA right, and why I think a materialist philosophy for the left is important for countering what I see as this kind of irrationalist, atavistic philosophy of the MAGA right. So yeah, that's what I've got and set for today's show. So how's everyone doing?
Doing all right.
Yeah, I'm hanging in there.
See that we got two of our hosts together in person.
Yeah,
live from Meat Space.
Yeah, coming live. Lenin Square.
Hell yeah.
But we're doing good. I don't want to speak for Joseph, but we ate some good Vietnamese food yesterday, so we're happy.
Yeah.
Escaping from New York City to DC, from Sodom to Gomorrah.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, God. So, yeah, we're good. Hanging in there. Looking forward to talking materialism. This is something I've spent way too much time thinking about, writing about. So, yeah.
Yeah, I saw the Chibber article and let me actually first I'll bring up the article itself. It's called "Materialism is Essential for Socialist Politics," and right there, I don't think any of us disagree with that right there, right?
So you mentioned the peanut gallery, which included at least me, but because when they tweeted out the article, they had the blurb for it or whatever of that, materialism is this particular
right,
is the material interests of is basically applied in a sociological context, material interests of workers that and includes money and all that stuff. And I guess we'll get into it in a second here. But he does qualify it that these other types of materialism ultimately even though it was the blurb that caught my attention, the problems with the article are more subtle than that, and as well as the problem with his project overall is a little bit more subtle than just a misapprehension of anything.
Right.
Well, as far as I, so he kind of tries to get away from it, which is fair. Kind of the overall philosophy of materialism, physicalism, all these kind of metaphysical debates, and tries to go into the sociology, and that's really the crux of the article. There isn't actually that strong a connection between the over philosophical points he makes in the beginning and kind of the sociological paradigm he tries to defend.
Right.
And I think it's more worth turning to that second kind of sociological aspect that
Yeah, hold on. It's let me bring up the blurb real quick.
it's the crux of his article. And kind of stated in the simplest terms he does is it's not super controversial. Having said that, I read about half of it and then just kind of didn't continue. So I don't know where it's sort of going. People can point out the greatest hits, but it's worth looking up like his first thesis. I don't know, Donald, if you can pull up the article itself.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that people were reacting kind of to this position, materialism, the view that agents are motivated by their objective interests, has fallen out of academic fashion in the recent past. And I think right there, like that definition of materialism is kind of easy to disagree with because
yeah.
And
I mean,
it's also very easy to modify that statement so that you can't really disagree with it. Like, yeah, certainly it's a tendency, right?
Yeah, I think it's more accurate to say it's like a claim of like it's a materialist claim you can make, rather than like materialism as a whole.
Also, it's very much the work of the statement or the weight of the statement fully falls on the loaded term interest. Like, what do we mean?
right.
So it's like one of those statements that, like, taken vaguely, it's not even falsifiable.
Right, that's the thing is it's
Operationalize it becomes less controversial, but then maybe it's not very interesting. So, but it's worth hashing out in what sense we mean interests in kind of the classical Marxist account, right? Because the thing is that it is in the interest of the workers to struggle for socialism, right? I mean, that's really where we want to. That's what we want to argue. So it's worth
right. And I think like if it was someone else writing this article, people would be like more fair.
Yeah.
Because of Chibber, and Chibber's been on this whole like, we gotta like, focus attacking the woke, while MAGA is like going on this like rampage against like the entire left in the name of anti-wokeness. Is like people don't really want to like give Chibber like the light of day, I guess. So we don't want to.
To be fair, that's a stupid crusade, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I think Chibber is like making a lot of very stupid political claims lately, and so I think people are like not very like we went over we did an episode. I think it was the one that you missed actually, but we went over like that interview he did going on about wokeness or whatever, and kind of went over why this is like kind of is stupid. But so Chibber, he's had some very stupid political claims lately, so people aren't going to be fair. But if you open up the article, he says, okay, right here, there's actually like 3 distinct materialisms, and there's the ontological materialism, which is that reality exists independently of our minds, which is true of the natural world as well as the social world, in contrast to what is sometimes called idealism. And I think that is basic ontological materialism, right? I think
it's one thing to have a debate about that. It doesn't actually, in my opinion, it actually, and you can take it to be logically separate from the other kind of claims that are going to be made.
Right. I mean, I think you could agree with the claims made later on and not agree with that claim.
Yeah, I actually think that's totally possible.
You could be a idealist, a metaphysical idealist, and agree with the sociological claims made by Chibber, but
you could. I mean, I think it wouldn't be. I think it would kind of undermine itself.
Right. No,
it wouldn't be the cleanest in some kind of intuitive sense, like package of beliefs, but it's logically possible.
But I think that this is a correct definition of materialism ontologically, though, right? I mean,
I would. You could make it more sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be my definition per se.
Yeah.
Like, I would probably say something that sounds more sophisticated and smart, maybe. But like,
yeah, so humble, Donald. But to be fair, I also think that the term, like in the world of philosophy, the term materialism versus idealism they're not terms that are currently used very much. But who cares? You know what academia says. We can call them whatever, but the importance is It's how we define them, how we relate them to other concepts, et cetera, et cetera. So, but yeah, nothing really to pick. I don't know about anyone else, but it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be the crux of the debate here. Like, oh, we're going to discuss Descartes' demon, etc.
Right. And then there's epistemological materialism, which is just, I feel this is kind of just realism, right? Like that.
Well,
I do think that there are like different types of social materialism that you can imagine. Like this itself is kind of restrictive, and one like even speaking of like objective. I mean, he says like their material or economic interests. They certainly like you do have to specify that because you can have objective interests that aren't material or economic, and two, you can have like a social materialism that isn't based around interests at all. That is like more based around structures or like the like capital doesn't talk about interests that much at all. It's talking about like this is the logic of the commodity and like I mean there's talk of like of individuals playing these like social roles, personifying them, which for better or ill is like is the way that he approached it. So I think that this particular approach is informed by a little bit more modern academia than Marx specifically. But we can continue.
Yeah.
But I just want to say, like, he also says, he has an epistemological materialism, which says that that we can have, accurate understandings of reality or approximate truth of reality. We can basically a basic statement of realism that I think we could agree with as well.
Yeah, I mean, basically, there exists a mind-independent world, and we have knowledge that gives us access to it.
Yeah,
that access is in some way qualified by the fact that our knowledge corresponds to, or our statements correspond to, the way things are, right? And so, I mean, there's nothing super.
Right. I mean, there's plenty of.
It's controversial in a philosophical sense, but it is a plausible philosophical position that
right. And it is materialism. Like it is. That is like an accurate like understanding. I think it's like I said. It's. I think this gets a little more dicey. I mean, rely on the premise that agents are acting on their objective interest, more specifically their material or economic interests.
Yeah, that's you could certainly I think the better way, you could certainly posit that as a tendency in people, but once again, a lot of the work in that statement is done by what we mean by interest. Right. In quote unquote bourgeois economics, it's pretty easy to operationalize that almost mathematically, right? For instance, an agent is trying to maximize income or something, right? Or
marginal utility theory.
Exactly. Yeah, you know what I'm saying. But even that comes with like, well, what the hell is a marginal utility, right? So
that does kind of get like what this operation that he does in this essay, and he also does this in Class Matrix, is kind of position himself as articulating being with like the pre-cultural turn Marxism. But he doesn't really reference that Marxism at all very much in making these arguments. And it certainly wouldn't be the way that they were making those arguments.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing we want to be able to argue is that somehow this package of philosophical and sociological beliefs allows us to make a case for the fact that workers can be motivated to fight for socialism, right? And they can be motivated to fight for socialism because they're susceptible to the message on the basis that it will improve in some sense their material well-being. But once again, these are statements and concepts that have to be hashed out, made sense of. But we'll see. I mean, I haven't,
Yeah, we'll keep going through the article here. All right, so he says these three all come together to a coherent framework that asserts an objective reality that can be apprehended, and these are all the arguments that Marxists believe, and that so you have to commit to the ontological and epistemological prepositions, and then he says that we have this turn in social theory that rejects largely the second and third components of traditional materialism. And this is called the cultural turn. And I mean, there is a cultural turn in social theory. Some people don't want to admit this, I think, but like there was a cultural turn, and it mean that like people didn't like look at culture before, but there was this and he goes into it more in the class matrix, but like you see it firsthand in academia. Like you start like when you study to be like a history, in history, for example, you start out like reading like Marx, and then they give you Foucault, and then they give you like Clifford Geertz and stuff like that, and it becomes more and more like well, first we start out like with Marx and Gramsci, and then Foucault comes along and tells us that it's really like all about discourse and and he kind of takes Gramsci's ideas of hegemony that he takes from Marx, and he takes it even further, and then we have this thing called the cultural turn, which is good because now we can finally be free from economic determinism and talk about interesting things now. So there really is this kind of turn in academia of the cultural turn, and you see it a lot with like in the class matrix. Like Chibber does focus on like
the biggest example for me is Stuart Hall.
Yeah, Stuart Hall, who is like still somewhat of a Marxist.
No, he is. I mean,
but like by the 90s, like he is basically like a liberal. Like he's like supporting like New Labor and stuff.
Yeah, that's gross. But even just methodologically, I mean, that's very much the culture.
E.P. Thompson, for example, is a big part of this cultural turn.
He is, but E.P. Thompson was pretty, I don't know, he's pretty well grounded, and
he does good history. I mean, so did Stuart Hall. I mean, it's not like
here's the thing though, is that in terms of from a theoretical perspective, I mean, like I'm sure that Thompson did good like empirical history work, but from like the theoretical stance he took was pretty much indistinguishable from all of the things that Chibber critiques as the cultural turn. In the class matrix, he tries to draw a distinction between an earlier phase that includes E.P. Thompson and then this later phase, but I don't think that distinction exists. And he has to give Thompson the pass because he really likes that essay, the the Poverty of Theory, critiquing Althusser.
Yeah.
He really likes that essay for some reason.
Well, because Althusser can be annoying. It's the French, man. It's the British and the French. It's an age-old debate here.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is like Perry Anderson actually goes through like Thompson's arguments against Althusser, and it's just like, bro, like what are you doing? Like these are actually like all pretty bad arguments. And he gives Thompson his due as a historian. He's like, listen, like you've done a lot of really good work as a historian. Like you've contributed a lot to Marxism, but when you talk about philosophy, you're just out of your depth here.
Yeah. I have, but the truth, I'll admit, I have not read it. I think I read 2 paragraphs from E.P. Thompson.
Yeah,
it's kind of a slog. I'll say that.
Yeah, no, I think when it comes to I think the Poverty of Theory book is really just not that great. He calls himself like a dialectical empiricist, and he has this whole idea of like
that's the most cursed combo of words I've ever heard.
Yeah, like he doesn't really like, the thing is he kind of like abandons the idea of like objective class structures. Like he doesn't say it outright, but like G.A. Cohen has a really good part in his book on historical materialism against Thompson, where he like does say like you do have to be able to like objectively define classes, not just like only see classes as subjectivities formed through empirical events. Because that's kind of what Thompson does, is he's only looking at class as something kind of formed through lived experience, which is an interesting approach as a historian, because it really does show class as a living, breathing experience. But as an analytical model, it has a lot of weaknesses. And
he does actually explicitly say that in the in the introduction to the making of the working class. I think I cited in the essay I wrote on materialism, where he basically lays that out.
Right. Yeah. I think he does basically say it. Yeah. So. Yeah. So. I don't know why Chibber has like such a soft spot for Thompson, but like
Well, probably because he's in the same kind of like milieu, like tendency of Marxism,
right.
more or less.
Also, it's just in fashion to poo-poo Althusser.
Yeah. Well, obviously, that's the other thing is that he's like he can't accept. He doesn't want to get into Althusser because he associates him with the cultural turn for decent reasons, because all of his students are the primary like protagonists or antagonists of that.
Well, they all became renegades or just annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
The only one who kind of stayed decent was Badiou, Adam Badiou, and even then, it's kind of all over the place. So I can understand. I mean, it's also a tendency amongst the British, since like, I mean, even if you read like Ellen Meskin's Wood in Retreat from Class, she's complaining about Althusser as the beginning of something awful. So
yeah.
it's a distinctly British American thing to see the original sin in Althusser. Anyways, who cares? You know, poor Althusser, let him rest in peace.
Yeah, that's the tendency. I've like because he kind of they see it as like because he sees like an autonomy of politics, a relative autonomy of politics. They see that's the beginning of the retreat from class. But I think that's kind of unfair.
Yeah, I think it is.
But all right, so blah blah blah. Enough about the cultural turn. Listen, I don't want to completely dismiss all cultural turn scholarship, because I think there was interesting stuff that came out of it. But I think at a certain point, like, it starts to run out of juice. And I think like even academia today like has seen a return towards like empirical studies of political economy. I don't think that it's like the correct way to do things, but like there has been like a move away from the cultural turn and these kind of like.
Well, okay, I'm gonna say something unpopular, but I would rather read 10 dry works of political economy and economic history than one New Left Review pamphlet on the amazingness of Gramsci. I find
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. Like I was talking to my friend the other day and he's like, maybe like, Michael, like you took the idea of Michael Hudson. Maybe it is true that like Michael Hudson does fetishize like the distinction between financial and industrial capital, but you're still going to learn more from reading like a single essay by Michael Hudson than you're going to learn reading the entire like collected works of Moishe Postone.
oh yeah. Bro, you could read a safety manual of a fucking electric drill and it would give you more. She Postone. It's not saying much, but yeah, no, I do think that quote unquote dirty empirical work very often just as data is just so much more useful than it's terrible theory.
Yeah, like I said the other day, like people should read more history and less people should obviously read theory. You need theory, but you can pick up a lot of theory by reading history, to be honest.
You also need to practice theorizing, and that means having data to work off of.
Yeah.
I will say that there is like something that he's doing here, this part in particular, that it kind of makes it explicit, and talking about like the macro versus the micro level of materialism. What he's describing here is basically something called the Lucas critique in economics. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
But basically that all sort of like macro phenomena has to be like represented in like the micro of like people's behavior, or what have you. And this has like some there's some critiques of this which I think are correct, that you can still have emergent behavior that is kind of like its own sort of structure. You can have Ian Wright has a good paper on this, of how even like random behavior can produce like certain structures.
Well, of course, it's this is actually something that I work in money body physics, but I mean, so you can be let's say that metaphysically you are what's called a physicalist. You believe that everything is the sort of thing described by a contemporary physics, and all of its dynamics are inscribed in, something, let's say, like quantum mechanics, right? And there's the quantum mechanics of a single particle. There's the quantum mechanics of many particles. Now, let's say you're that kind of physicalist. That doesn't imply that epistemologically you're going to be a reductionist, which is to say that you can use, say, the quantum mechanics of a single body or the quantum mechanics of a many body to encode and understand the dynamics of many-bodied systems. It turns out that you're going to need new tools in order to explain the emergent phenomenon or the complex phenomenon that come out of the interaction in these many-body systems. So, in other words, being an ontological or metaphysical materialist doesn't commit you to an epistemological thesis of reductionism. The very complexity of physical structure means that you need sort of new theoretical tools to deal with what are called emergent phenomena which don't trivially follow from the dynamics of these many bodies, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's all over. In fact, that's the very reason we have the many sciences. Because in my opinion, yeah, if it were tractable, or if we were God, we might be able to break down everything into physics. But that's not how things work. We can't. And so we have all kinds of different sciences which explain the emergent phenomena out of these complex physical systems.
Right. I mean, to me, that is like that's kind of the dialectical part of dialectical materialism, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the, so one of the things is very often you look at how Marxists have characterized themselves in philosophy, and it's actually possible to find quote unquote dialectical materialists not in the Marxist tradition, insofar as they share similar beliefs to what many quote unquote dialectical materialists believed. So they believed in materialism, as we were to ontological materialism. They believed in epistemological materialism. They believed in anti-reductionism. They believed in emphasis on process, right? And you find those beliefs shared by people outside of the Marxist tradition. It's actually not a wholly uncontroversial package of beliefs, right? So,
right.
In fact, it's really not at all.
Yeah, I always thought it was the kind of processual anti-reductionist, like emergentist aspect.
Yeah. That's actually kind of in a place like philosophy of biology, the dominant materialism.
Right. Whereas, I feel like but when people start kind of bringing in the everything moves through contradiction, that's when the dialectical stuff gets a little more dicey.
Well, that's the problem with that is I make fun of this. I call it speaking Hegelese and not thinking, right? It's grafting a very particular philosophical form onto all your thinking, and then not allowing yourself to actually think, but just repeating these nostrums. And
Right.
that's just being ossified and speaking Hegelese. It's not philosophy per se. Just mimicking angles of thought.
But yeah, so back to Chibber. He says, according to Marx, he's talking about G.A. Cohen, and he says, there's this classic theory of historical materialism where history is governed in law-like fashion by the progressive development of productive forces. Social relations adjust to the productive forces. Then ideas and ideology develop in relation to that, and then the class relations are going to be explainable in terms of this development of the productive forces over time. And he basically says, well, this theory is probably not really plausible. And I don't know. What do we think? Is this a plausible theory of historical materialism? Or I don't know.
I mean, it's the preface to the contribution of critique of political economy.
Right.
Yeah, I think one thing I will say is this. Okay, let's assume that statement is quote unquote empirical. It can be falsified. At least it's that, right? One, at least it's potentially falsifiable, and two, it's interesting. That's a lot more than you can say about many other macro historical theses or philosophies of history.
Right.
Trajectory. At least it's interesting. I don't think it's true always.
Yeah, I think the problem is when you actually look at history.
Well, yeah, then that's the major problem because that's what it's trying to be about. So of course,
Right, it things become more complicated. But I think that the problem is in trying to correct this theory, Marxists have moved a bit too far away from the technological determinism.
yeah, that's for sure.
And this is like one place where I do break with some of the Althusserians because they do kind of like I was reading this one book by an Althusserian on the transition to capitalism, and like it's like any theorist who like mentions productive forces, it's like an anathema to them.
Yeah.
So I think like there is like some truth to this theory. Like I do think like there has been like a move away from productive forces determinism that has like maybe been too far, but I think there is like a sense in which like there is a teleology to the productive forces in this theory that I think gives it a bit of too much implausibility. So yeah, and Chibber basically says, yeah, this isn't really plausible. But yeah, then he says there's this micro theory of agental motivation in social interactions, and this is more plausible.
I mean, yeah, that's fair. I think that is actually a fair distinction. I will say this: it is important to try to kind of how can I put it? Make trajectory statements about history, right? That's what Marx is trying to do there in the preface, right? Is trying to come up with concepts to think about the trajectory of social forms. And in that way, I think that is a valuable and deeply important project. Also because, how else do you make sense of micro in many ways without having this kind of trajectorial global view of history?
Right.
I mean, the other thing in there, though, this is going to be important for the rest of the article, is that the focus here, the way this gets applied, and this is also true in the class matrix, is it's only applied to the issue of trade unions and the question of unionization. And there's kind of this bit in the class matrix towards the end where it's kind of like, and everything just follows from there.
Yeah.
But this does leave a big question because there's lots of things, like everything outside of the workplace, everything of, like, yes, there's these incentives like that are intentionally created so that workers won't unionize. But what is that for everything else that happens in society that doesn't really apply so much? Like if people created like an association of like a political association to lobby for higher wages or a higher minimum wage or easier union, like any kind of particular interest that the working class might have, which, as we've established, are objective and material. Why doesn't that happen so much? Why? And he kind of hand waves us away with like, it's because unions went away, and that led to like political associations and stuff going away in general, like the bowling alone stuff, as if like social itemization wasn't a thing that was going on hundreds of years since the beginning of capitalism, a tendency that's been happening.
I mean, so there are objective. There's a class structure that exists independently of what any agent believes. These agents come to recognize and in some sense understand this class structure. They form social agencies on the basis of their class location. And in some kind of sense, the formation of trade unions is a reflex on that. They develop these trade unions to not only recognize develop a social agency and recognize their class interests, but to militate for them. And of course, this is good for trade unions and whatnot. But why wouldn't that apply? Why for so many other forms of association? Why doesn't that occur? I mean, I think the basic thing to say is there's a lot of frustration of that recognition, so to speak, and of that formation of social agency. And precisely like it's frustrated by counteracting tendencies, like you just said, like the vicious anomie and, and atomization and competition that imbues capitalist social relations.
But I think
no, yeah.
Well, the important thing here with relation to Chibber is that those things aren't in the purview of this like micro level account of material interests.
Yeah.
Those are all like macro level like things that are shaped like the structure of society. And the other thing is that like relating to that, everything outside the workplace is also what causes the relations of production to reproduce themselves.
Right.
And he doesn't really give like implicit in like the cultural turn. He always adds it. Occasionally, he'll add in the word ideology in there, like the ideological and cultural turn. But it's like there is no account of this like reproduction on like the larger level that creates these incentives. And is really the thing that's at issue here. And is the whole political question, basically.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, the great question is always what is frustrating the formation of the social and political agency of the working class, right? And there are so many answers you can give to that question.
Right.
The dumbest one being social inertia, right? Or the difficulty of the endeavor, or the fact that there are other quote unquote psychological and social processes that direct people to form other kinds of social agency on the basis of different kinds of relations than class relations.
Right. So he says, this right here is, so in trying to explain actors' choices in economic and political affairs, Marxists rely on the premise that actors are most likely going to pursue courses of action that further their material well-being. In so doing, they might be described as rational agents. Rational agents in this sense is action undertaken in defense of one's material interests.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is very controversial. And if it is a tendency, it might not even be the preponderant one oftentimes, right?
Right. And so in the class matrix, like I think the most obvious thing to say is here is like, okay, so if this is the case, why aren't all workers like unionizing? And Chibber points out, well, obviously like, unionization is weakened and not all workers are able to secure the or take up collective strategies to secure their well-being. But he says that it's actually the norm in capitalism to pursue individualistic strategies to secure your well-being rather than collective strategies. And what Marx was wrong about wasn't that the class structure is objective and all that stuff, which I agree with Chibber about, but that the main action that capitalism propels workers to take is more individualistic forms of action, and as collective forms of action that are less so the norm and more the exception. And so I think what you said, Nicholas, really does get to the point, which is something I was thinking here too, which is like he really is only kind of talking about trade union action. And when he does talk about the class struggle or like kind of offer anything like suggesting a definition of the class struggle, it's basically just like a battle over the economic surplus.
Yeah, I think I can vaguely remember at some point hearing Chibber say something like trying to apply this to politics. I don't know if I'm hallucinating that or if it was a dream or something. But I do vaguely recall him like saying, well, there's the same kind of like futility in like electoral politics, the way the Democrats are and whatever, which sure, but then that kind of goes to show that what's like if these things have changed over time, and they clearly have, like this claim that the individual the individualization of these interests is the norm, I think that's still kind of it's naturalizing our current moment a bit too much, because like social atomization is not the norm of human societies. This is something new that only has existed, like it has become more and more pure in capitalism. And the opposite was assumed to be natural 300 years ago when capitalism was in its infancy or whatever. But that also goes to show that if the political thing is also futile and the trade unionization thing is also futile because of these material interests, then what's at issue here is not is what is controlling those. What is the structures at that level? Because it's like and he'll talk about we do need like this culture or whatever to get this off the ground. But it's like obviously there's no shortcut around like actually having like building your own structures basically. But it's like this isn't really even a theory of that. This is a theory of it's trying to provide an alternative to what he says is like what the cultural turn analysis is doing. But even that I think was really like both this and a lot of that cultural turn stuff like the Frankfurt School, I feel like doesn't actually cut to the heart of what's actually going on. And it's just kind of like describing what's going on more or less in an empirical sort of way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So he's got more stuff about the ideas that people are kind of acting according to rational interest and the drive for profit. I think it's easy to argue that capitalists are driven by an objective interest to maximize profit, right? Like, and regardless of how they are able to regardless of their ideology and culture.
Insofar as they inhabit that role in order to survive.
Exactly. And a worker, insofar as they inhabit that role of a proletarian.
That is a very key clause, though, insofar as they inhabit that role. How they act outside of it, so to speak, in the artificial hours where they're off is another thing.
And the thing is, though, is that their location in that role, though, is not contingent on their understanding of its cultural importance. I think is kind of
or of its workings.
Exactly. And that's why I think that's where Chibber is basically correct against the cultural turn people. That the meaning is encoded, the encoding of the meaning is not prior to the economic structure. And I think that is like where Chibber is basically like correct in the class matrix.
I mean, this is like I would add a little complication to that because so the way that Chibber describes it here is that by virtue of being objective, economic structures force the roles that people take to be within certain confines, that they have these certain that the ideology is limited by this need for individuals to reproduce themselves, which is true to a certain extent. The issue is that in somewhat that cultural coding of what people are supposed to do is happening. It's not. You can't really say that it's not prior to or that it is prior to. It has to happen.
That is true.
If it doesn't happen, then the thing actually will break down.
It's part of social reproduction.
Yeah, this is social reproduction. Like if you do have to get that step of encoding in order for it to work.
What you're saying, but it's not clear to me exactly what you're saying.
So let me give an example. So like if people like if we just abolished all schools tomorrow, if basically people, you had a large feral like child population, if you had people who weren't socialized to know that you're supposed to take a job in order to support yourself, like you might have lots of people like just eating out of the trash or whatever. That like you actually do have to like get people on the program with that. And if like in capitalism, it's implicit that like people need a job to eat, to survive, to have shelter. If people don't associate that with getting a job, if people don't know that, that's not like it. Like obviously, like part of this is a like the cultural encoding is reflecting a certain material fact. So it's part like material things, material processes are still like represented as signs. They still are like they're things that we recognize in culture as well. So in part, or if it was to break down, it would in part reflect something material, probably.
But I mean, there was the existence or the formation of a certain class structure, say in 18th century England, well before there was nationalized schooling or a mass cultural understanding that insofar
what you did have,
insofar as you were a laborer, all you had to sell was your labor power, right?
So this so part of it, like there was like that work was much less complicated. You were just told to do this one thing. But it's also true that one of the like part of the prehistory of capitalism in England was like the rise of grammar schools and stuff, and trying to get like people who were like uprooted by primitive accumulation into them, so that they weren't just like roving bands causing trouble.
I think here the poorhouses were much more important. And
yeah, and that too was a part of it.
No,
I was
much
just
more
thinking
important, and the also the Navy, things like the Navy abducting people, and in places like France, the formation of the state, there's a large part played by conscription. I think that, I mean, maybe it's me just pointing out that schools is a bit of an arbitrary selection. It seems like our intellectual bias that we think that them going to school is what allowed them to know.
Sure, but I mean, let's say like if they did like completely shut down all the schools, like there would be an effect on basic social reproduction breaking down.
Yeah,
it would hurt the ability of the capitalist society to kind of chug along as we know it.
So one thing I think a lot about is that like the effect of the Cultural Revolution in China that is reflected still today. That they forced a lot of like teachers out into the countryside. They have like China, even like today, has much higher like education in like its rural areas than a lot of its neighbors. Like India has much lower like rural education. Like like literacy, it may have mattered less in like the initial stages of industrialization, but it starts to matter more as like it's like less of the most immediately.
One thing I'm going to go back to is how does this in any way, shape, or form? What are we discussing? How does this even kind of?
So what I'm saying is
really
that,
complicate
like,
what I said, as opposed to just being more or less an addendum.
Well, it like that information about what a job is and what the role is has to be disseminated, and like that part is kind of like taken as a given here, but you do have to like you don't necessarily have to take that as a given. That there's like if there's a breakdown in socializing people in general, then you can't have them take on particular roles in society like that.
And that's true of every society of any kind at any time.
Sure, but this is a fact about societies, and it's one that like that is just it's true. It's and if you have like a general like something that causes like a general state of anarchy of like a civil war or something, and like a lot of these things about capitalism start to break down. Maybe piracy becomes a more popular option than commodity production or something. It's not like this is a part of the social reproduction of capitalism, which is in some ways contingent.
Right, but I think the difference is like a class structure is you have to learn to take up the role or else you're going to starve. Whereas like something like a role where it's like a church or something like that, unless it's like a hyper theocratic society where you're like forced to like go to church and take up the role, it's something you choose to take up. So I think that kind of makes the class structure have a certain kind of a greater objectivity, I guess.
Well, listen. The main thing is this: if you need certain institutions to disseminate the knowledge such that people can inhabit such and such a class role, then in many ways that's almost just functionally required, so to speak, for the stability of capitalism, right? You need to train your workers. That's basically what it comes down to. You need to make sure they know what it means to be a worker. I mean, to be honest, I don't know about you guys, probably the most powerful mechanism for doing that is not going to school and learning that the hungry caterpillar ate this and that leaf. It's literally mimicry. It's just seeing what other people do.
Well, yeah.
That is the most powerful. That is the most powerful thing. No one.
But I want to point out
there isn't a Be a Good Worker 101 class where they sit you down and say, the hungry caterpillar ate this leaf, and then that means you have to go to Sears and sell this fucking machine or whatever, right? It's really just
look, there can be lots of different ways that socialization can happen, but I do want to point out one thing is that capitalism is not necessarily in a stable equilibrium, and the proof of this is in the rise of social atomization, which has been just rising and rising, has never stopped. And if it rises forever, then if it, at some point it would break down the socialization of people.
When I said functionally required, I just meant to counteract this notion that the existence of these institutions is in some way contingent. It's not. It's in many ways it's just unknown necessity. It's one that's required by quote unquote the system. It's one that's also pretty well recognized even by the capitalists themselves, right? But okay, I mean, in a sense, it's not a given. Let's not get focused on, or fixated on that.
Yeah, let's not get too fixated.
I'm just trying to kind of be quote unquote fair to Chibber and carve out all of the essentials in whatever account he's giving, and not require too much of the account that he's giving. Whereas it's not an account there's a certain account he's trying to give, right? So I'm sure he's aware of these complications. It's just not what he's talking about at that moment. So anyways.
Well, I'm not sure he's aware of the way that that capitalism is creating more problems of socialization for itself. Because this is a big topic of my work, and showing that just how this has been breaking down over time. And that has he does dance around this because it's the same reason that there aren't any unions anymore, that there aren't any political associations. Those things were socializing institutions that now no longer exist. Althusser counted unions as state ideological apparatuses, the ones that aren't directly controlled by or associated with a socialist or communist party.
Even that, the CGT is not some, is not some compound for anarchists trying to abolish the state, huh? So yeah. It's anyways, yeah, let's go on. Let's try to get to the
okay.
So yeah, then he has this section on the virtues of materialism, which he says that the labor movement in the 20th century had this conception of materialism, and from this conception of materialism, they had a political program. The political program was basically it was based on this idea that you had a party constituency that had material interests that were based on this political program. So, I mean, I think it's hard to disagree with the Marxists thought that there was a class in society, the proletariat, that their political program reflected the interest of, and they were going to organize this proletariat into this political party around that program. I think that's pretty uncontroversial. And obviously, he does say that they didn't try to recruit and rate people based on the moral attractiveness of their goals. That's not necessarily true. There was a lot of that as well. Like, I think, but it is basically true, though, that the idea basically is in Marxism that there is a propertyless mass of people who have an interest in socialism, and this program represents those interests. Democratic engagement. This is an interesting claim, I actually thought, is that if people are responding rationally to their circumstances, you have to treat them with respect because, well, they're rational actors, or they're reacting to the world around them in certain ways that we have to come to understand. And in other words, instead of concluding that they have been deceived by ideology or being manipulated or internalized harmful norms, you treat them as intelligent people with a basic understanding of their situation. I'm not going to lie. It's kind of hard to do that sometimes. like how do you see the MAGA world today and not think that people are like being misled or deceived by ideology? That's my problem, I think, with a lot of like what Chibber is trying to do, I think.
Well, he's a bit like contradictory on this point, right? Because later on he says that like people can be deceived because of things are complicated or whatever. That like the rational, like what would be immediately beneficial in a rational way isn't apparent. So either way, you're still making an argument that people are deceived. It's just like on what level, and on that, like in that sense, people aren't like making I don't see why people would be more insulted by one versus the other. Although I'm sure that if you did talk to someone using too much like intellectual vocabulary, that would probably be annoying. But it's I don't really see what Chibber is doing that different from what the things that he's critiquing necessarily.
Right. Okay. I see. This is a deep convo about step back in about false validity of false consciousness, right? As a concept. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious there is such a thing. I think it's pretty obvious. I've been reading the Machiavellians recently by Burnham, and a lot of these I'll say one of the strengths of the elite, the Italian school, the elitist school, is they actually do understand that there is something called false consciousness, and they're very aware that you can in fact inculcate it in people to very beneficial ends for the elites. So the enemy is aware that this is a thing. Not be naive and deny that it does not exist. You can absolutely convince someone to act against their interest. I mean, even in like a banal sense, like we lie to people all the time, even maybe in our daily life, if we're not being such a great person in that moment. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, no, but the elite theorists are highly aware of this, and the fascists themselves, the more cynical ones, are very aware that you can play on the quote unquote irrational part of people's minds as if it were some divisible thing, and to act in ways that do not immediately benefit them materially, spiritually, or in any other way, and towards or for the ends of others. So yeah, is this really what we have to treat them as if they're intelligent people with a basic understanding of their situation?
Well, that's the problem, is Chibber doesn't treat his interlocutors as intelligent people with a basic
Yeah,
that's not false.
Well, but the problem is, I guess he just says, they just have PMC consciousness, and that's why.
Well, he's kind of got like that like Slavophile, like folksy, like the folk have all of the wisdom, and the degenerate intellectuals. It's like,
Yeah, it's all just the PMC brains, Marxists, all the workers. They may have all these, you know, ideas, but in the end, they're just coming to the right stuff through rational interest, and everything's just getting muddied by the PMC.
Wisdom. Bro, the folk wisdom, it's gonna get us where we need, but the degenerate intellectuals of the cities. Like, it's kind of got like that sort of Nazi and intellectual fucking subcurrent, doesn't it? It's kind of weird.
Well, that's the problem. That's the danger with the PMC discourse, and I do think like there is a truth to like there is like a professional, managerial, like bureaucratic like thing in the left. I don't, you know, but like there is this, you know, a danger in the PMC stuff that you fall into this like Volkish kind of populist nonsense,
exalting folk wisdom, which is
like
a staple of fascistic ideology. Anti-intellectualism, unfortunately, the bearers of intellectualism, so to speak, they're the people who are employed to those ends, whether you like it or not. So it's sort of like you can be critical of that class, but to go too far and hate all of its bearers, just like in some kind of abstract sense, does this very creepy, dead-end, weird corner, you know?
But I will say, though, like, if we are going to be Marxist, we do have to kind of believe to some extent that people can be guided towards rational politics.
The way I always like to put it, and it's like when I'm speaking to people and I'm not trying to go too deep into this shit, I say working class people are susceptible to the message of socialism. They're susceptible, right? There's a greater odds that you can get them invested in such a thing than someone bourgeois. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That is a very fair generalization, I think, right?
Right.
Egalitarianism appeals to someone who suffers the shit end of the stick in an anti-egalitarian society, as opposed to the person who's living at large in an anti-egalitarian society. I think it's a pretty basic statement, you know? Whether or not that's the only thing they'll listen to, whether or not there's a one-to-one between, you know, promoting the message and someone accepting it, that's another thing, right? But they're certainly more susceptible.
Yeah, I do think that there's like a way you can take that argument and also just make it an argument for tailism, because like if people are just being rational, then and they are currently like just voting for the existing bourgeois parties, then they're rational to do that. It's the right thing for them to do, or whatever.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've seen people say, "It's like, who are you to tell workers who vote MAGA that you know better than them?" Like,
I do. I'm sorry. I wouldn't waste my time doing all this shit if I didn't believe that. Am I always right? Am I wrong? Am I always right? No. Am I wrong sometimes or wrong?
Yeah.
Sure. But like, you can't start to pretend to try to position yourself as the leadership of the left and not have a belief that you know so much more than the average worker. Otherwise, what the fuck are you doing here?
Otherwise, you wouldn't be leaders.
Yeah, you're wasting everyone's time. Like, and you know, is that because of some special intelligence that we all possess, or some like God-given? No, it's not. It's because we take the time, we read the history, we think things through. That's kind of part of our job, right? So it's sort of like, have the fucking confidence. Like, it's just, yeah.
It's also just not like esoteric knowledge. Like, it's not that hard to like read some Marx and figure out how this stuff works.
It's not, dude. Like,
it's not like reading like some esoteric religious text like some people try to make it into.
I feel like this is only really a problem if you subscribe to a particularly strong reading of whether people follow their interest or not. Like, I think you can say that from objective structures, certain interests arise, but to say that people necessarily follow those objective interests is wrong. Like, it's clearly wrong. Yeah. People are motivated by, first of all, people may not understand their objective interests.
Not at all.
Like, they may misapprehend it.
Yeah, they don't even understand what working class really means, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's people just have to have more confidence on the left. And, you know, I mean, this is also like something as like people who have read a good amount of Lenin, and people might even get to trade union consciousness, but it does require an extra push. It does require the extra organization, the extra propagandizing to recognize the necessity that under capitalism, they will not lead fully materially and spiritually satisfying lives. It does require that injection of novelty, right? I mean,
Yeah.
otherwise, what the hell are we doing here? Why the fuck would any worker need to listen to you then? If they could just get trade union consciousness or whatever consciousness just by looking around them, spectating, why on earth would they need to listen to you?
Well,
Why
I mean,
would they vote for you?
to be fair, like someone like CLR James, you know, for example, he basically said, yeah, like the role of Marxist intellectuals is just to like recognize and record what the workers are already doing, and
That's,
you know, because they already they will figure it out on their own. They don't need Marxist intellectuals to tell them what they need to do because they are already in production and are already grasping, you know, which is, I don't think that's true at all. I think that's nonsense. But
you see, if everyone had that view, then no one would understand anything.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That is such a good point, actually.
Also think about it as like any other form of study. Like, oh, you don't have to like actually go to the people who have done it, like studied it before. You don't have to learn from them. Just fucking look at the wall and you'll come to understand the laws of physics. Like, no, you have to go to people who have thought about these things before, think with them, learn from them, maybe even improve on it, but you have to fucking go to other people who know what they're talking about. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
No one just spontaneously like is born with absolute knowledge of the social situation. I wish, but that's just not how it works.
A lot better for us.
No, I do think that there is this weird kind of like fetishization of the working class in moral terms, where it like the fetishization, it very much is like this Volkish knowledge is like this indubitable like well of absolute knowledge and intuition that can't ever be challenged.
Well, I feel like that has a political motivation.
Yeah, I guess it does. I think it has a lot to do also with the guilt of intellectuals. You know?
Yeah.
Like, I think it has a lot to do with their guilty conscience. Like, oh, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the workers know and I don't, because if I say I do, then I'm a dick, basically. It's okay. You know, like I'd hope you'd have the humility to like admit you can be wrong and think things through, but it's also okay to assume that you might know things. You know? But,
Yeah.
So especially in America, dude, like people's spontaneous class consciousness in this country is pitiful. Like, I'm just gonna say it, it's pitiful. People have no understanding if they don't do some study of the class structure. In a place like Britain, people have a more intuitive understanding that there are classes and this really distinguishes our lot and our destinies in society. But in America, they have no fucking idea. They really don't. I mean, it's immoral.
Yeah, it's like just basic trade union consciousness is hard in America, I swear.
Yeah, I swear. I mean, like, they literally think of a worker as like a guy in New York sitting on like iron things and being like, oh, I'm working here. Like, that's what they think like being a worker is, you know? And everything else.
Very idealized picture.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why it's like you can't really avoid the issue of culture and ideology. Like,
of course not. But
you know, and that's like, listen, I understand like the cultural turn created all these epistemological and like all these ideas that ended up making it impossible for us to talk about class structures objectively, and you know, it did create all this crappy theory that basically made it so that you know, we just made class into like one more constructed identity or whatever. But you know, we do have to talk about culture and ideology.
Listen, it's a whole research program, and I've called it analysis of the frustration of class of the formation of class consciousness, right? And the problem is when that research program becomes a big poo-poo fest that Marx was wrong, as opposed to a serious research program to figure out what are these conditions that frustrate the formation of revolutionary class consciousness, and how do we counteract them, right? Or how do we, basically, what tools do we have given contemporary conditions to help spur or help push that formation of revolutionary class consciousness, right? And I think the number one thing I think all of us can agree is goddamn organization. We need a fucking organization,
right?
Mass organization. that's linking people.
But then the question of building organizations are also cultural questions. There's a culture of organization. People get together in the world and have to interact and create norms of, interaction and,
Yeah, of course. But you would hope that there would also be a information transmission mechanism where you're able to express, maybe not such like austere terms, but this is the class consciousness, this is the class structure, this is where you fit in, this is the class consciousness we should be developing, this should be our ultimate goals. You'd hope somewhere along the line it could get those messages across, right? I mean, but
now Chibber does talk about how having a good solidaristic culture is important to develop, even trade unions and what have you. But it does seem like an obvious omission. If that's the solution there, how is it not the case that culture plays a role in the reproduction of capitalism, and the suppression of that itself didn't involve cultural aspects, and what have you.
The other thing is what do we mean by culture? This term gets,
Sure.
Well, he does define it very specifically in the class matrix.
Basically, it says it's people's ideas.
Yeah.
In short, I think that's fair, right? It's a fair description.
Yeah.
I mean,
one of my problems with the class matrix is he takes that introduction to define what culture is, but then he doesn't define what structures are, the thing he's opposing to culture. And he even calls himself a structuralist, but he doesn't seem to have thought a lot about what that means or what structures
I really don't see the distinction. I mean, if culture is just the pattern of regular ideas that people have in a society, then how is that not a structure? I mean, but once again, we're just flinging around terms without really having defined them in the first place. So could be anything. But so that's another thing is kind of I don't understand what we're, it just seems like a very, it's like mirrors kind of just like a dualism about body and mind that doesn't make sense to me. Take a media apparatus. It's a capitalist firm producing commodities.
Right.
It's also producing ideas. It's also a major player in quote unquote culture. I don't really, even in that case, I don't really see the distinction between a culture.
Right.
Sure.
Well, in the beginning of the book, he has a note on terminology of the class matrix. He actually cites Raymond Williams, who I think is one of the smartest writers on culture that more people should read. Or he says he doesn't mean, because Raymond Williams kind of makes a similar point to you, where if we're talking about culture, it's not really separate from material infrastructure. We're talking about not we're kind of talking about when we talk about culture, we're talking about entire ways of life. That's not just it's the entire gamut of social practices, from religion, ideology, the arts, but also politics and economic institutions. And he says, we're going to use them. He says, we're not talking about culture in this sense. We're talking about a more narrow use of culture, which uses it to denote ideology, discourse, normative codes, and so on. So that's not exactly a very precise definition.
It's really not. That's throwing in a ton of stuff into a bag and calling it.
Right. So I think there is a kind of a problem with his kind of ontology of culture and ideology here, where he kind of is putting it in a separate realm from the material in a way.
What this debate is really about is motivating which intellectual discipline deserves more funding and attention. Which should I is me reading about the fucking trade regime in Madagascar in the 16th century, should that get more funding than me analyzing 90 Day Fiance or something like that? Because for me the whole debate, this is something that drives me sometimes absolutely insane with just all debates in general. It's just ambiguity. And the definition he gives in the beginning of class matrix, I'm like, well, that's not a definition. That's just a list of similarly vague terms. So it's very hard to know what he's criticizing too in that way.
Yeah.
It's frustrating. As I said, it's kind of like it becomes most concrete when you're like making value judgments about which field of study is more important, studying 16th century Madagascar trade regime or Desire and 90 Day Fiance, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think it is more important to study the trade regime and
actually crazy enough, given how much people watch that show, it might actually
you can make the argument.
You could actually probably gain a lot of insight into like the way media works, the way our society.
Yeah, no, the thing is like I actually have been like reading more about culture lately, and I think there is like a lot to learn from studying that stuff. But
like
need cultural materialism.
Yeah, I mean, for real. I mean, just study whatever helps you gain insight into the society. You know, that's whatever allows to gain leveraging knowledge about what to do. I don't really care where it comes from. If we had a crystal ball that told us, great, that'd be awesome. We don't. So.
I think that like his instincts against like the cultural turn like are totally valid. Like who needs like another like paper or essay about like deconstructionism and Derrida like interpretation of something. One. So I need more.
You know? Well, I think Derrida, like I listen, like I kind of want to defend Derrida in a way, just because like obviously like a lot of slop came out of him that I won't defend, but I do think like he kind of was. There is a rigor to Derrida that you don't get in a lot of his followers. But anyway, that's
listen.
No, I think I still have a big grudge against him because of like what he did to structuralism, and that whole paper the whole thing he did to attack Levi-Strauss. Who Levi-Strauss has all kinds of problems, but Derrida's like attack on structuralism was so like nihilistic and self-defeating. It led nowhere.
Yeah, no, that is the thing. He's basically like
you read Levi-Strauss and you're like, this could be right or wrong, but it's interesting. You read Derrida and you're like, I think I smoked too many drugs or something. I don't know what the hell this guy is saying. I took a whole class with Badiba, who's like one of his great disciples. 8 classes or something. 20 hours. Don't tell me to recall a single thing I learned, because I learned nothing. Okay, so I think that this debate in many ways is, as I said, it's like which forms of knowledge are valuable for our movement, and that kind of seems to me to be the crux of the debate. Really, is it another study of 90 Day Fiance using the tools of post-structuralist theory? Or is it something more boring, like the use of political, the tools of Marxian political economy to study the formation of the, Bretton Woods system in post-war? And unfortunately, I think that for the most part, the second one it's more valuable for us understanding our world today.
I'm getting this sense from Chibber here, and you can tell me if I'm off base, but he seems to be arguing something like, if it wasn't for the cultural turn obfuscating people's perception of their interests, then people would naturally gravitate towards their objective interests. But because this is happening, then people aren't able to grasp it.
I think he's saying it's part of the frustration. I think he's saying it's part of the reason we can't get our shit together, which is kind of fair.
I think that's fair to say, but I also think that if that's what he's arguing, he's giving it a lot more primacy than is actually the case.
I don't think he goes that far.
Right, because
it makes that claim.
I think it's more that he's saying we can't get our shit together because of all these terrible ideas.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, terrible ideas in a leadership can really confuse things.
Right.
If your leadership that's the one thing you probably want out of your leadership more than anything, is to have clear ideas that they can translate into practice. And if you don't even have clear ideas, which are like in of themselves not translatable into any political practice, that's a serious problem. That's a paralysis of our movement. So we do need to kind of have this intellectual contest to win the debate. What are the most valuable forms of knowledge for men, right?
Now, I think there is an important problem there that relates to Chibber's theory. That it becomes clear in the class matrix and like about halfway through or so. There's he talks about the legacy of social democracy and how basically what the problem was is just that as trade unions fell away, like the political base of social democracy went away. And true enough, but the way he talks about it, because of his theory of like of material interests being this micro level thing, he makes it seem like that this was just like a pure historical contingency of like politics, and doesn't have like an economic like reality behind it that was really like driving it. So like this feeds into the Ackerman Brenner debates, because what all that was about was that the tendency for the rate of profit to fall wasn't, like Ackerman was claiming that it wasn't real, that the falling rates of profit wasn't real, and therefore that it couldn't be blamed for the collapse of social democracy and the Fordist order. And this is like fundamentally wrong. Like one, I showed that Ackerman's math was wrong, but two, I did that in a blog. But two, it's like the if you look at like economics, if you really look at the collective profit equations that are basically a formalization of what Marx was talking about in Volume 2, you'll see that like there is not just labor and capital in a pure political dispute in the economy. There's one more thing, which is fixed capital and depreciation, which is built off of like production decisions in the past and so on. And if you don't account for that, like of the way that like the fixed capital grows and has depreciation costs that are required to reproduce itself, that was one of the big contributing factors for the profitability crisis. And the fact that like Chibber's theoretical framework here doesn't allow that to enter into the picture is a big problem, because there's these like there are these like macro level structures that are informing reality, like informing all these material incentives or whatever, that you can't arrive at just looking at things from the micro level.
Well, the death of European style social democracy, anyone can have their kind of pet theory for why it happened. I think it's a strong case to make that there's an economic theory, maybe it's centered on the crisis of profitability to fall, but the truth is that there's any other number of theories, right? I mean, a contingent theory is the fact that Nazism really was a razor blade to the German SPD. And institutions are especially institutions that anyone who knows, institutions that where people have to have a lot of knowledge are very fragile. If you destroy one generation that can transmit that knowledge and that practice, can irreversibly damage that institution. Anyways, the SPD was pretty crooked even.
I mean, well, this is like obviously there's other ways that things can fail, but this has implications for like just the general Jacobin theory of politics of what needs to be done, because, and this is something I point out in that blog that I was critiquing Ackerman, is that if you don't account for these economic contradictions, then you're not going to be prepared for them. Or know how to deal with them.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, listen, there has to be the economic conditions also for social democracy, but you might argue in places like, well, actually, not really. I was going to say in a place like Norway, if you have a sovereign oil fund, it may be feasible. Who knows? But not everyone has that, right? So it's kind of moot. you have to, so the Saudis could do it if they weren't so crooked and disgusting. But beyond that, if you don't have a shit ton of oil you're sitting on,
Yeah.
good luck. Anyways, yeah, we should continue. I'm sick of it.
So yeah, he goes more into the issue of rationality here, and this kind of gets into the meat of it, I think, where he says, what I propose to do is address some of the anxieties expressed by the arguments from culture. So he says, okay, materialists argue that across a range of social phenomena, actors can be expected to rationally pursue their material interests. So I think there is something to this. Like, we can say across a variety of like different cultural contexts, like around the world, we can expect that regardless of the religion or the the cultural niche or whatever that people are in, they do basically have a common interest, and we want to have food and shelter and dignity and basic kind of there are basically kind of universal human. I guess I'm falling into humanism here or whatever. So, but I think there is some common human interest beyond any kind of cultural difference that I think
there's an invariant set of human needs that are basically determined by more or less biology.
Yeah, and I think that
claim is so banal. What do you do with it, right? Because need is such. I mean, needs are so historical.
Right, but even outside of all of the historical mediation, like I think in the end, like people who are exploited to a certain degree, regardless of culture, to a certain point, are going to like resist in certain ways. They're not going to resist in the same ways. There's going to be a cultural context to how they resist, and they might resist purely individually. But regardless, I think you can say like there is a universal commonality on that level, I think. So I mean, there's something to that claim. Maybe that's too far, but
I think Robert Montgomery asks, why is what important? The whole convo?
Why is this important? Well,
why the invariant needs are important? Well, I mean, basically it's important because if he's trying to make the case that people act rationally, the notion is that insofar as their needs are frustrated, they will resist in order to overcome those conditions which frustrate the satisfaction of those needs. Right? I mean, it's pretty clear why it matters in the context of his argument. Why it matters overall, I mean,
we'll get into that. So, second concern is that basically that we're just turning people into economic maximizers, and I don't know if I think that's necessarily what he's doing, but is that there's all kinds of counterexamples where people act irrational, which is what we say. And so he says, is the case that a materialist theory agency reduces all motivation to be economic? It is true that materialists may sometimes give this impression, but a materialist theory by no means requires it. Point is that the pursuit of these other ends presupposes a successful pursuit of material ends. If I wish to be a successful artist, okay, that's reasonable, right? Like if you want to pursue moral, aesthetic, and religious ends, you're not going to be able to do that if you can't eat and etc. Like, fair enough, right?
These are banal points.
Yeah, these are very banal points, but they're worth stating, I think, because I think sometimes people do forget these things.
Yeah, but it's kind of also like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which, by the way, it seems like things like art, actually, they're things that human beings have always done. Even in a state of scarcity, where I doubt they were feeling satiated at any given moment. People made art, so I'm not sure it's even historically that accurate. It's not interesting, that's for sure. You need to eat before you draw. Okay, great. What do I do with that?
Okay, so then he kind of says, from this we can generate the following proposition. It is not the case that economic motivation will weigh equally on all social endeavors. Rather, it will register its effect with different degrees of intensity depending on sphere of activity. Okay, well, I mean, that's fair enough. So where are you going with this, Chibber?
Well, basically, what he's getting into is that the things that are not compatible with that economic reproduction will basically be forced to fall away or be ignored.
Right, which I think is fair enough. Rather, it's that the theory is primarily concerned with the domain of social existence where economic considerations will how we perceive himself economically and how the power relations sustain it. Marxism is not a theory of everything. That's speak for yourself, Chibber. It does, of course, have arguments about how the class struggle constrains other spheres of social activity.
I mean, there is a way of like, I do think that this is kind of not well addressed by his theory, is that how does the culture of solidarity get around that? Like if like, material interests like force cultural things that aren't like compatible with economic reproduction to fall away, and one of those things was like this culture of solidarity or whatever, how then what do we do with that? That seems like it's from the perspective of this theory, it makes it seem like it's inevitable.
Right. Then he has a thing about does rationality entail hedonism, and he kind of argues it doesn't emphasize maximizing behavior. So what does rationality mean for Chibber? He takes up the example of trade unionism, which I think is, as we were saying earlier, that's kind of one of the problems, is that he takes trade unionism as his model for class action. But the problem is like, well, I mean, trade unionism is easy to kind of see where this game theoretic approach works out. But when you get into larger society where the class struggle becomes a political struggle, not just like a trade union struggle, that's where I think it becomes more complicated.
Why isn't there a labor party?
Exactly. Why isn't there a class party? Why isn't there a revolutionary movement? And that's, I think, where things get more complicated.
I mean, even less than a revolutionary movement, because I mean, like you can say, oh, like the state will suppress that. I mean, like the most like simple like association for like lobbying of people's interests. Like why isn't that a thing that's much more common? And the answer he gives in the class matrix is basically that, well, because trade unions aren't around, there's not a social base for it. But I think that's a bit of a cop out.
Okay, so I feel like this is kind of where he gets into the issue of false consciousness. All right.
Over that.
What was that?
I thought he kind of already went over that.
Right, but this is where he gets like more in depth. So it's rather than an example of workers acting against their own interests. What's the example? It's a prominent example of this case, routinely brought up in criticism for materialist theory. I guess I'm criticizing materialist theory of the working class voter who seems to vote against their interest. How do we make sense of the fact that workers vote in large numbers for parties like the Republican Party, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
We're the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Rather than an example of workers acting against their interests, it is an example of workers trying to pursue them. 2 points are important here. First, that rational actors pursue their interests is not to say they're always successful in this endeavor. This is a claim about their motivation, not about their success in the pursuit of this interest. So I guess that's the argument he's going to make, is that basically like the reason that workers vote for MAGA and vote for the Democrats and don't like form a communist party is because they see this as like the most rational like way of like pursuing their interests. And so, but in the end, then
I don't buy it.
But that's just saying that everyone's always rationally pursuing their interests, because everyone always thinks they're rationally pursuing their interests. You know, like everyone always thinks they're acting rationally.
If it applies,
right?
If it applies to every instance, it's not an interesting or a verifiable claim.
Right. So I
see it as the intervention of God or this thing called reason. You know what I'm saying? So, it's also just like, I'm also very tired of the whole like, why do workers vote for Republicans? Not that many do. For fuck's sake. Like, stop overemphasizing this shit. Most of them don't vote. Many of them vote Democrat, you know?
Yeah, and it's also
MAGA,
like...
MAGA is fundamentally, its most frenzied base is petty bourgeois.
Yeah, and like some workers are just
Mhm.
fucking stupid, are not going to come onto our side. I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah,
it's not the majority of them. I'm not saying
Oh,
that,
no.
like, but like, there are stupid people in every class.
Also,
Like,
like, this is something that also I think sometimes the fascists understood better. Sometimes people also want to feel part of a social project,
It
right?
just seems like an overcommitment to the idea of rational agents.
It really is, man. And
yeah, and like I you know, I don't want to fall into like Sorelian, like we need to create a Sorelian myth to like motivate the masses to act, and
yeah,
you know, but you know, there is this overcommitment to rational actions that I think is actually leading to a defense of irrational actions. Because
well, listen, I think it's fair that people want like a social project to participate in a social project. This has been a deep human need for the longest time. People had quote unquote organic communities that gave them a certain social meaning, right? Like, and so I think it's fair that people want to participate in a heroic endeavor. It would be all the more powerful if that heroic endeavor could be connected not just to their quote unquote spiritual needs, but to their material ones as well. But that's what a lot of people, we're going to say workers in quotes, are voting for with MAGA. It's like, well, it's America. We're part of the nation. We're going to make the nation great again. It's like, you know, I mean, that's appealing to a different, I don't want to say part of the brain, but a different part of human beings, you know? So it's kind of like, as long as we don't recognize that you can tap into different sorts of motivations and quote unquote desires than appealing to people's rational interests, we're always going to be at a disadvantage. We have to play all sides of the game. You know what I'm saying? We don't sell them pure bullshit demagoguery, but, you know, I mean,
so why is this important, comrades? I think that gives a pretty good answer why this is important, because like a theory of materialism does relate to how we understand the world, which relates to how we communicate our politics to people and how we understand what our politics even should be, right?
yeah, we want to sell them.
Yeah.
We want to sell them heaven and earth, right? Not just one or the other.
Bread and roses.
Yeah,
I said bread and roses.
Yeah, exactly.
Not the DSA caucus, but the
figuratively speaking. And
figuratively speaking. Yeah.
Understanding what motivates people, I think, is pretty obvious why that's important in terms of literally getting them back. I don't know why that it seems so banal a point that I don't even know why we would debate it.
I do wish that I wish that Chibber had actually read Althusser and engaged with him seriously, because I feel like that would provide a correction for a lot of these problems, including like the one at the end here of like false consciousness that, like, well, and also like how does like culture of solidarity get around this? Like, you have to create like your own ideological apparatuses, basically, that somehow reproduce themselves, and have that that structural role in society. That's the only way to really provide an alternative. And also, if he had read Althusser, he would have a much more rigorous idea of like one, what structures are, and also how the not just this very simplistic micro versus macro theoretical formulation. I think he could probably do something much better. I just wish he was a little bit more rigorous in his scholarship, basically.
Yeah, I think I've talked to people who kind of like know Chibber and his scene, and they tell me that he's surrounded by a bunch of students who basically just kiss his ass, and if they criticize him, he excommunicates them, and he doesn't have to listen to criticism, and he just he's basically created an intellectual environment where he insulates himself. And there was, he's not really he doesn't actually have to really listen to like other scholars like criticize his ideas, which is how a Marxist intellectual degrades, even if they have some interesting things to say, because I didn't think the class matrix, from what I read of it, was all bad. Like, I think there is some truth in this, and I think, you know, like, there is like a need to theorize class after the cultural turn.
I just wish you did a much better job at telling me what the hell that is.
Yeah. I think part of it is you kind of have to experience the cultural turn.
I agree with that. That's true. That
like, you kind of have to like be in a grad seminar room, like hearing people say this stuff to like get it.
No, I mean, listen, as I said, I think fundamentally, really what that distinction is meant is it's motivated by a need to distinguish valuable from confusing forms.
Right. I'll never forget when I said in like a history grad seminar once, I was like, yeah, like after 1870, like the era of the American smallholder was essentially like inevitably finished. And someone, like the professor, was like, we don't use that kind of language in history anymore. I'm just like,
it's polite society.
It's like you act like I just like said like some kind of like racially like atavistic stuff or something. I don't know. Like, It's like, no, like American smallholding is not like an option anymore. You can't just like go like become like a fucking yeoman farmer anymore in America. Like after like a certain period in American history, like that economic option is closed off. That's an empirically verifiable claim. Like,
I mean, you could, but you have to be like the Unabomber. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like it's
or yeah, like the Grizzly Man. You know, like
or like I think I like used the term progressive once to describe like the civil rights movement or something like that, and they were just like, we don't use the term progressive. I'm like,
wait, why?
Because that's teleological Marxism, and the cultural term has debunked all of that stuff. Like, I'm telling you, like there is like I don't.
You're probably right. The thing is like I've been away from that world for quite
right.
some
time. Like I do understand why like people like Chibber kind of go crazy. Like
yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Like I just think that you have to like not go crazy. You have to keep your head on your shoulders, and you have to you know have an intellectual environment where you're open to criticism and you know like Chibber's pro cop. Like he
is he into like the cops are working class thing?
Not just that, he thinks we need to like hire like 500,000 like more police officers. Like one of his students wrote this like position paper that like actually like the real solution to the real solution to police violence is that police are actually like there's just not enough police, and that's why they resort to police brutality. So we actually need 500,000 more cops. And
dude, if everyone was a cop,
it's an under
police, bro. That's a great argument, man.
It's under police. He basically said the problem is under policing, which is I don't know.
God, in the U.S., are you fucking?
Yeah, like I just don't see how you look at like the police
There's
situation.
not enough donut shops to.
It wasn't Chibber who wrote the paper, but it was like you know a couple of his students, and it was like under his guidance, I guess. But
I would be, if that was my student, I would be very skeptical about them. I'm not saying I would excommunicate them immediately, but unless they
well, no, they weren't excommunicated. Chibber supported them. He was like, no, this is good work. This is, you know, a good like debunking of these defund the police crazy ultra left nut job students. Like
we need more kinetic squads in the in the New York train stations, making sure that 12-year-old kids don't hop the
that's a real issue.
Yeah, it's the real issue. It's the real social issues that
it's like, yeah, it's like, listen, we can say that like, you know, maybe we do like, you know, like I don't know, just that's not like a Marxist position on how to like change criminal justice at all. That's not the fund. We need to fund the bourgeois state more. It's just such a ridiculous position. Or anyway,
the carceral part of it.
Yeah, we need to fund our enemies' ability to repress us. That's
that's a great move, bro.
Yeah. So speaking of irrationality and appealing to people's irrational instincts, the right has been doing a really good job at this, I think, and I really do think that MAGA is as a movement has really taken up this kind of irrationalist philosophy, both explicitly and implicitly. And I think there was a clip going around that I wanted to play for you guys to kind of get your
oh hell yeah,
to this because they, you know, I think MAGA kind of are discovering this irrationalist like Sorelian Nietzschean type
well,
of
for this asshole, it's just Edmund Burke, you know, like, you know, so this is good shit. You'll see.
Yeah, hold on.
Do is say out loud what's on their minds, namely that all of the
Let me get it full screen. So yeah, this guy, I don't really know much about him. His name's Wade Stott. He's like I don't know, some stupid fucking conservative guy, but he you know, because like you have people like Ben Shapiro who are like, oh, like we're all about facts and logic. The left doesn't believe in facts and logic anymore. I'm gonna only use facts and logic, but I think the right is now basically like just saying like, no.
conservatives have a bad habit, and I'm trying to come up with a name for it. But first, I'll describe it. They see the Hindu statue in Texas, or the planned Muslim city in Texas, and they start debating about the First Amendment. They see the guy who moved here from India trying to impeach the president, and their minds jump to the merits of his case, or lack thereof. What they won't do is say out loud what's on their minds, namely that all of these things are weird and bad and shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't have huge Muslim cities in Texas, or huge Hindu statues, or state representatives who can't pronounce representatives.
Representatives.
Trump is right. Even our leftoids aren't made in America anymore. But conservatives feel like they can't have an opinion about something unless they have a legal or scientific argument. You get the feeling that if a raccoon showed up in their kitchen, they'd start figuring out how to sue it for squatting. And once conservatives decide something should be stopped, they try to stop it in a way that sounds neutral and objective. Take the example of someone who's trying to get rid of the Hindu statue. He'll propose that we make a law against any religious displays, or that religious displays should only come to a certain height. I'm not anti-Hindu, I'm just anti-things that are tall. Or the person who's trying to stop trans surgeries. He'll try to find studies showing that people regret getting them. Even when conservatives know what they want, they'll struggle for a standard to appeal to. They'll appeal to science, they'll appeal to reason, they definitely won't appeal to religious dogma, though they should, but one standard gets consistently left out of the discussion. Some call it common sense. Russell Kirk called it folk wisdom or folk law, and Edmund Burke called it prejudice. Here's Burke. You see, sir, that in this enlightened age, I am bold enough to confess that we are generally men of untaught feelings, that instead of casting away all our old prejudices, we cherish them to a very considerable degree. And to take more shame to ourselves, we cherish them because they are prejudices. And the longer they have lasted, and the more generally they have prevailed, the more we cherish them. We're embarrassed to talk this way. We assume pre-rational judgment is always unfair. We want all of our opinions to come from double-blind studies or careful deliberation. But it was also controversial at the time. When Burke was writing, Enlightenment rationalism was what every smart person thought, and here he was defending untaught feelings. But why are they necessary? Aren't people capable of thinking through issues on their own? Burke didn't think so. We are afraid to put men to live and trade each on his own private stock of reason, because we suspect that the stock in each man is small, and that the individuals would do better to avail themselves of the general bank and capital of nations and of ages. Now, there's an important distinction here. I'm not saying that all human beings intuitively know what's right, as if everyone, given enough time in the right armchair, would come up with the same conclusions about the world. That's like expecting everyone who picks up a guitar to eventually write Stairway to Heaven. Remember, some cultures are prejudiced against bathing, but Burke was an Englishman writing to a Frenchman. He saw the French throwing away generations of good prejudices and embracing chaos. Healthy prejudices come from healthy cultures. As we lose our culture, we can no longer take advantage of that general bank and capital of nations and of ages. And we've been taught to think of that capital as being evil. But of course, every advantage that previous Americans gave to modern Americans is supposed to be evil. We're subjected to a sort of cultural inheritance tax. But if we're repulsed at something evil or attracted to something good, even when we can't explain it, we should be grateful for that. We shouldn't leave it to each new generation to discover fire for themselves. This kind of prejudice is what culture is built on. Without it, we tie ourselves in knots so that we're not able to do obvious things. Because Burke's enemies won, it's turned everyone into diffident losers, too quote-unquote humble to believe anything. Burke again. Prejudice is of ready application in the emergency. It previously engages the mind in a steady course of wisdom and virtue, and does not leave the man hesitating in the moment of decision, skeptical, puzzled, and unresolved. Prejudice renders a man's virtue his habit, and not a series of unconnected acts. Through just prejudice, his duty becomes a part of his nature. In the last few generations, we've lost this. What should be strong convictions, we treat as personal preferences. We think we have to make a rational argument for being what our grandparents would call normal. We don't think we can act until we've dotted every I, and that's because we've allowed ourselves to be bullied by the rationalists. But it turns out you don't need permission from Neil deGrasse Tyson to tell someone to get their muddy shoes off your couch. I do think this is turning around. Since Trump came on the stage, people are more comfortable using the phrase, "we don't do that here," or
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree with me.
If this kind of confidence comes back, we might be able to do a lot of good. But as Russell Kirk said, prejudice and prescription are delicate growths, slow to rise, easy to injure, hardly possible to resuscitate. Cultural instincts are more like orchids than they are like dandelions. You can't just spray Roundup on them for 3 generations and expect them to pop back up when it's convenient. I don't think that healthy prejudice is dead, it's just been hiding, usually behind some rational argument. Because we've cut ourselves off from a lot of our healthiest instincts, we shouldn't trust everything we think. But we also shouldn't feel like we have to cite 14 studies before we can say, "That's weird, somebody stop it." Everyone has cultural presuppositions, and we should value ours. Basic confidence in our untaught feelings is something we don't just need in the general populace. We need it in our commentators, our judges, and our
representative.
So yeah, that is the kind of nonsense that the right is now just saying openly. I feel like this is what they always
It's
believe.
so funny
But now there's
that he has like a John Oliver-esque like delivery for all this. Almost like in the set is the whole thing is like John Oliver BuzzFeed adjacent from like 8 years ago or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's to be fair, at least he's not as neurotic and annoying as John Oliver. John Oliver drinks like every C4 mixed with Monster, and then just takes a script and just reads as fast as he can. Where do you even start?
There's a lot.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Well, first of all, there's just like the racism there. Like he's picking on the Indian guy mostly because it's just like that's like almost the acceptable target these days to go after.
Bro, just leave the Indians alone, man.
Yeah, come on, like
what are you hating? But the thing is like, so it's worth kind of elaborating on the sources, the highbrow sources that he kind of selects to try to make his case. So Edmund Burke is a rascal who was an Englishman. I think he was a parliamentarian. And he wrote a famous book, Reflections on the French Revolution, in which he basically put forth a reactionary attack of the French Revolution and a reactionary defense of whatever the hell the English were doing. It was he kind of opened up a line, but it was also, I believe, a common line at the time that one of the problems with the Enlightenment was this overemphasis on the powers of reason, right? And so he counterposed this thing, prejudice, to what we call reason. And prejudice is, in his form, a kind of bastardized, simplified version of, in many ways, what like the Romantics at Jena and in Germany called sort of intuition or absolute, what they would consider a form of absolute knowledge.
yeah.
But in his way, it kind of had this political connotation of being the prejudice of a people, their culture. Yeah, exactly. English opinion over.
But it's kind of like
he also tried to get Thomas Paine arrested for critiquing him.
And Edmund Burke, his beliefs were truly despicable. On the one hand, he was like, well, prejudice means that we're connected in this community, this family, and the workers should be obedient to the parents and respect the parents' wisdom. But then on the other hand, he's like, and the parents can just like completely do whatever they want to the children and just
yeah.
It's like this very like convenient human community and family where like the workers have to shut up and just work, and
well, he called it
whatever, huh?
He calls tradition like he calls it like a contract of the living with the dead or something like that's the kind of term he uses.
Okay, what a dweeb.
Yeah, and so it's like tradition is like fragile, like an orchid.
Yeah,
and
no, he's fragile. Like,
but yeah, but reason is harsh and it cuts everything apart. It's easy to break everything down with reason, but tradition is something that's fragile. It needs to be protected.
Yeah.
That thing about the contract between the living and the dead was what Thomas Paine was calling him out on. Is this something most like nonsense, like that everyone who's alive is basically enslaved to all the commitments of their forefathers, which is obviously not true. People can just do what they want. Yeah.
It's also like it's also like in our moral universe, like thank God we're not committed to the beliefs of our forefathers, including slavery. So where on earth is in his so people just believe the same thing across all generations. I'm a bit he's an idiot. Thomas Paine was
I have a copy of his book right here.
I mean, it's pretty.
It's honestly, if you want to read a real reactionary banger on the revolution in France, though, it's this is the one to read, the Maestro one. This is
the Maestro is much more rigorous than Paine, than Burke.
Burke is crazier than Burke too, though. Like the Maestro is like straight like
he's a monarchist of the first.
Yeah, he's a straight monarch. Burke is a bit more measured. Because he does think that the American Revolution is somewhat justified, I think.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm comfortable in saying that Burke is an idiot. I tend to put that term around, but Burke is actually an idiot.
And Burke is beloved by conservatives today.
Yeah, so many people call him many people call him like the grandfather of modern conservatism. He's a I mean, when we throw around the term conservative, he's a liberal of the first sort.
Yeah, he's a Tory, basically.
He's a liberal of the British sort. You know what I'm saying? Like, now, like to get fast forward, I mean, I'm sure people will interject, but to fast forward to now, what I love is like the use of this like quote unquote highbrow culture to justify just like the racism of this inane person who's like quote unquote Texan culture has been whatever it was locally shredded by post-war suburbanization and consists in drinking various forms of high fructose corn syrup, going to the strip mall and yelling yeehaw at a fucking monster truck. So it's like, if that's your culture, then like, you know what, whatever.
Yeah, just like let them build the Muslim city and let them build the fucking Hindu temple. Because that's just as much real American culture as whatever you practice, to be quite frank.
Yeah, and like also it's like, because you have none. And also, it sounds based. I want a giant Hindu statue near me. Okay, that sounds awesome. I also love the Muslim city. Like, what is a Muslim city? Like, as in, like, they're literally just like a bunch of people, just like where they just.
Are they enforcing that?
I don't know what the hell they're talking about. What is?
Isn't that what this all? Aren't they supposed to be all about sovereign cities and softcore or whatever? Like, aren't they? Whatever happened to Exit, man? Like, I thought we're all supposed to be able to build our own autonomous cities here. You know,
not like that.
Not like that.
But wait, what is it? Is it actually a Muslim?
I don't know what he's talking about.
Like
I don't. I'm gonna Google this right now.
I think I saw something about that, but
I bet you it's just a big mosque. Yeah, exactly. And having a lifted F-150 that does absolutely no tug. Exactly. That's culture. That's the prejudices of his great grandfather having a giant truck the size of a Sherman tank. It's ridiculous, dude. Yeah, fake ass cowboy. Exactly, dude. Yeah, like you put them out in like the actual desert and they're like, my lips are chapped. Like they're like gonna die in like 18 hours of dehydration. Come to my desert in Algeria.
I just want to know how this is a Muslim city. Like, are they required
let me see.
say the Shahada or something?
Yeah, exactly. Like you have to like everyone has to wear hijab, like even the men. You know, like,
there's a DOJ investigation. Some Texas leaders, including Greg Abbott, have raised concerns the proposed community could try to enforce Sharia law.
How? What are the?
But they always do that fucking boogeyman.
Yeah.
Well, aren't all those Jews in New York City? Don't they have all their own weird religious laws they live under?
Yeah, I think they do. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, like
you're allowed to do it, then.
Yeah. Wait. Let's see. But what is it? I don't understand. Can you find like less about their like being snowflakes reacting to it and more about the actual thing about it itself? Yeah, fake. I truly like, just to respond to 500 USD. like one of the things that drives me like insane about like conservative culture is just like this mawkish, like I'm so manly kind of bullshit of wearing like camo and like that's their having guns and like that's a culture. Like you're just impoverished like as a spiritual being. Like it's just so mawkish. They have to show they're manly. It's just like just shut up. You're so annoying.
I just don't understand in what sense that constitutes a culture.
It's not. I think that's the inherited prejudice. Like who are you inheriting that from? Like what's the?
Well, I'm sure if you look back far, it's very recent. It's not a tradition at all, actually.
What's that fishing store? Bass and whatever.
Bass Pro Shop.
Yeah, that's their inheritance. Like,
hey, they got a pyramid.
They're inheriting it. Yeah, they have
inherited prejudices that have been forged so carefully over countless years of
the vast fucking catalog
cultivated by their forefathers.
Of course, their forefathers, like probably some German guy that like came to like Texas and like, you know, like
John Von Judas Slayer.
Exactly. 500 USD said it. So cool. Mail-in securities as a stand-in for cult. It's exactly that. It's like, dude, we get it. You like guns and hitting things and being violent. And
so it's
not a culture, you know.
It's a planned development.
It's just a real estate development. It's
not even
like
permits yet.
So how? In what sense is it Muslim?
Yeah,
I guess
that's the marketing. I'm assuming.
Is it like
a
Muslim people
community.
moving there?
Yeah, maybe.
I think it's just
Someone pointed out that's just Edison, New Jersey.
Yeah, exactly.
that's just large parts of northern New Jersey at
this point. Yeah.
I guess it's kind of there's a mosque. I guess that's kind of the East Plano Islamic Center have been targeted. So I don't know. It seems like it really isn't even much of the story. Yeah, it's just right away making a big deal out of nothing so far. Quite frankly,
it's just incredible how delicate they are. You know what I'm saying? Like there's like plans to build this thing. I haven't even built it. And they're already trying to go to Edmund Burke to justify why they don't want Muslims near them. It's like, dude, chill the fuck out. Like, what? It's like unbelievable. These people are just.
Oh, this is like there is. It definitely felt that this was like a part of like the general post-rationalist kind of movement, which was like part of what I was talking about last time I was here. That there was like is a part of like the cultural. Like explosions of like the past 10 years that like really hit and also hit like the rationalist community online. There was those people who some of them became neo-reactionaries, and then there was general like post-rationalism, which said, well, rationalism's not that good, it's not that useful or whatever, so we're gonna just do a bunch of woo that to kind of that should get us closer to what we want. And this is kind of like position, like feels like it's in conversation with that a little bit, even though I don't think Burke is a very big influence there, although maybe he is, I don't know. But that's certainly something that's going on right now, is that there's a lot of people out there saying we need more esoteric and like religious and mystical kind of stuff because that's what works.
Well, yeah, but
it's like the rational strategy of deploying woo towards your own ends, like, which is a very like it's a very cynical and demagogical kind of strategy.
Right.
Let's be honest, it's not totally ineffective, huh?
Well, I think if the left, like, I feel like the left has kind of, let's just be real, like, if a left that has abandoned like materialism and scientific realism as a kind of starting point for its philosophy, is completely willing to take up these kind of positions. Like,
that's fair, but I also think that it can also flow, quote unquote, from a rational position of trying to deploy the most effective tools.
That is true. Yeah, that is absolutely true.
So I do think that there's part of it where we have to kind of not be fully cynical, but learn from our enemies. And I do think that the heroic narrative is important. You have to sell people more than just a menu of things that they'll be able to consume, which, by the way, in any social rupture is not going to be necessarily better than their status quo. You have to get them to be able to sacrifice for something meaningful, something heroic, right? And I mean, let me put it this way. What kind of life do you want to live? Participating in a great social project for me is much more meaningful than consuming this or that other thing. I mean, that's just my.
I think the big problem with this, like from even on its own terms, like for post-rationalism, is that once you accept that and you take it to heart, like the process of rationally approaching something and trying to understand it, that no longer becomes something that you do or are supposed to do. And it eventually gets like, you might know some things, but like the process of understanding isn't just like something frozen in time. It requires like active investigation and learning over the course of your life. And if you shut that down intentionally, the only person you're hurting is yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could hurt other people, but you will be hurting yourself. And I think that's something like I see it everywhere, like in the right-wing accounts that I follow, of how this is like actively like melting people's brains. And like, have you guys seen like the Yarvin posting on Twitter now? It's just showing how much of an idiot
God,
he
it's
is.
great. Let me actually, I kind of want to bring up some of this stuff.
Hell yes.
Is so
By the way,
stupid.
I want to advertise that Donald and I are thinking of writing a criticism of Burnham so that we can start to just
Burnham, the Managerial Revolution.
but also Machiavellians, which is like the book which seems to have at least openly inspired Yarvin the most, and so it's worth looking at. We're going to try to do a reading of Machiavelli and stuff and see if we can produce some writing out of that. We'll probably riff on it here just to practice, but yeah, it's a new project that we're trying to get started on. Yeah, I mean, Yarvin is hilarious. He's really so his recent thing has been like, from what I can tell, also is this like discourse that democracy is an abstraction, and that like we shouldn't talk in terms of abstractions. And
he uses democracy all the time to like mar things he doesn't like.
Yeah. Well, thanks 500 USD if we can actually get our shit together and produce it.
I would also like to read that.
Yeah, I've wanted to write a critique of Yarvin for a while.
I think it's better to like attack the more high-end sources.
But I feel like, yeah, you got to go. And I've been waiting to like read the sources to kind of do it, because he really is just a cheap knockoff of.
Yeah, it's like the gas station literature version of the real article or the real thing.
But right, so I think, like if we reject reason and we reject that our politics like should be based off of reason, like I feel like we can reject that. Like we can say, okay, all we need to do is just provide a rational argument to people and they will get on board and everything will work out. I think that doesn't really work, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't base our politics on rational arguments and on rational analysis and on a project of reason, and that we shouldn't provide rational arguments for people. It's just that on its own, that probably won't be enough. We do need to
also like
other motivations to act.
The dichotomy between a rational and a virtuous being is not a very good one to start with, right? You want to, a rational being is a virtuous being, and you want to have a package of values which might not necessarily have the same sorts of criterion for judgment through which people can make evaluations, right? You want to be like socialism good for material reasons, but also socialism good for spiritual reasons, so to speak, and moral reasons, and you don't want to have those kinds of claims conflict. That's the kind of worldview that we are trying to build, right? Or we should be trying to build. But it is something that I thought a lot more about, because I've kind of been perusing, like, Mosca, Gustave Le Bon, Sorel, all these crazy people who very much emphasize, like, no, fuck all, don't make any rational arguments for these animals that are the masses. Just appeal to their basest instincts and whip them up in a frenzy about this or that nonsense, right? And
Right.
Unfortunately, they tap into something, which is that a very narrow and rigid view of rational argumentation necessarily won't fully motivate or mobilize the full human spirit, right?
Right.
You can do it in a quote unquote noble way. You can make more expansively rational and virtuous arguments that do mobilize the full potential, that do mobilize people in all of their in all of their complexity, so to speak, right? You know, no one's gonna fucking go on the barricades for eggs to be 10 cents less. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just not how shit. That's not how it works, right? No one is going to make a sacrifice of temporary well-being for, you know, for rigidly and obvious rational reasons, right? But that does not mean that quote unquote selfless and altruistic behavior is not rational, right? It is something that rational beings do, as a matter of fact. They have done it all throughout history. So it's up to us to also come up with an account of reason that isn't so rigid, that helps us understand why rational are also virtuous beings, or beings that care about things like virtues or morals or ethics. So
right, and I think that's what we need to do to counter this irrationalism of MAGA that just appeals to people's base instincts, but also to counter this rigid, I guess, mechanical materialism of Chibber, I guess is what we want to call it.
Yeah, I'm not even sure like what kind of. It'd be helpful if he could have given us examples of the sort of arguments to use, right, to appeal to people.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what 500 USD said is correct. I wouldn't say it's reactionary dichotomy, but first and foremost, a false one, right, or a simplistic one.
I do think reactionaries frame it as a dichotomy.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's definitely for sure. But yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know about you, but like, I don't see a meaningful life where I'm not a virtuous being in some sense, as a rat.
You know, I think that you can certainly say that you can have values that are in some sense pre-rational, that aren't like necessarily based on like knowledge or what like the things that you can learn, but are probably based on like some overdetermined psychological thing you experienced. But applying those to specific circumstances does require like learning about things and knowledge things. Like, for example, we just looked up that thing about the mosque or whatever. Like the guy who's doing the presentation doesn't actually want you to look that deep into it, because it might not be like this outrage thing that he's trying to present it as.
Yeah, it makes it sound like it's the sand people and
yeah,
coming to whatever, you know, and it's like you look it up and it's like plans for a mosque. It's like not that big a deal, dude. That's another thing is like, yeah, maybe you can have quote unquote you know, I kind of start off from the position, and it's that human beings are rational beings, and that if you look at history, you kind of have to come up with some sort of generalization which encompasses the richness of that rationality, and that does mean accounting for the fact that they're not only quote unquote selfish beings but have virtues, right? They always have some set of ethical and moral, always. Like, there's no human society that has not had that, right? So I kind of start of it almost like anthropologically. I don't want to say it's axiomatic, but it's something that I start off with. And it's kind of up to us as thinkers to make sense of why it is that human beings, qua rational beings, are also virtuous beings, are also beings that care about something like morals. There's always been forms of moral evaluation and argumentation in any society. It truly is kind of an amazing thing about human beings, right?
I think the point is that this is different from Burke's concept of prejudice, because like that concept is almost like designed not to have you look too deep into things, basically.
Because as a moral being, if you're truly a rational being, you realize that quote unquote reality might not live up to those moral evaluations. Or that reality might frustrate those moral evaluations. And so you have to actually understand how things work to make principle live up to reality, so to speak, or to bring them more into correlation or correspondence. And that actually requires you to somewhat understand how the world works. Also, in the case of Burke, it's like pretty clear, like even in his writings, like prejudice is basically just a cover to allow the rich to just plunder the poor. And that's all it did. It's the only purpose it serves for him, is like that it's just an excuse for people to beat up on lesser, you know, on it's not genuine.
Yeah. And there's this there's this appeal to intuition. It's like, well, just if this makes you feel uncomfortable, if this like makes you feel weird or uncomfortable, don't think about it, don't investigate it, don't question your reaction, don't think deeper, just trust your instinct, because that instinct is based on this deep, long tradition of culture and of prejudice that is based in this long lineage of knowledge and tradition that is so much deeper than any kind of rational argument that you can think of on your own is kind of what the argument is. And it's just such nonsense, because it's a way to keep people from actually thinking about the bullshit that you're trying to force on them, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
it sounds like you're making a sophisticated argument, that you're actually like making some really deep point about like, well, actually the treasures of mankind are so deep and sophisticated that it's such the folly of man to think that our reasoning skills are more powerful than the intuitions guided by these deep, you know, ancestral traditions. But no, actually, our reasoning skills are actually like more powerful than these.
Thank God, if appearance was essence always, then you know.
Right, exactly. Like
science, you know, it'd be OTOs. So it's kind of like, yeah, and it's as you said, basically the bottom line, not over theorizing, is he's telling people, shut up and don't think. Yeah, that's a great prescription, man.
I mean, it's
going to get you really far, you know.
It's very similar to what we were talking about earlier with the academics talking about how, like the real knowledge of how to do this is in like the working class. But instead of like it being a social class, it's just like, oh, your ancestors, it's in your blood or whatever. I mean, any excuse not to think is a problem.
This is something that I have. It's a big thing that I used to think a lot about, which is people making appeals or to a form of pre-discursive knowledge, which is supposed to be more reliable or absolute than anything discursive or conceptually mediated. That is a very dangerous form of argumentation. Basically, it's a showstopper. I remember arguing with all kinds of theologians about this, like, well, you have to have had the intuitive experience of God.
Yeah.
In order to know absolute knowledge. I can't express it to you. I'm like, that's very convenient for you. It's very convenient that you've had this experience, private experience that no one else can have, and that you can't communicate it to me, but that it makes you the repository and bearer of absolute knowledge. You know, that's really great for you, man. No, but standpoint epistemology, you know, it's kind of a modern term, but this is an old debate in monotheistic forms of theology, as debates over absolute knowledge. And in fact, the phenomenology of spirit, I have many there's many, if anyone knows me, I'm not a huge fan of Hegel, and especially his legacy. But if there's one thing I absolutely love Hegel about, it's his criticisms in sense certainty. The notion that there's an immediate pre-discursive form of knowledge that is absolute.
Yeah.
And it's where, if you want the most sophisticated criticism of standpoint epistemology or prejudice or common sense, read that. Just that first chapter, it's brilliant, right? You know, I mean, it drives me crazy, that kind of.
Yeah, no, I think that's really the issue here. And I think that's the problem with the left, is when the left falls into this kind of philosophy of intuition and lived experience, it can fall into irrational ideas. And that's a danger that we need to push back against. And
there's no debate we can have. You know, it's like literally.
Right, exactly.
There's literally nothing we can deliberate on.
And that is part of why materialism is so important to the left. When we reject that there are, you know, ideas that are objectively true and objectively false as well. Like
or that there's a way of deliberating about it.
Yeah.
Deciding intersubjectively. As soon as we abandon that, we abandon a community of rational beings. And then where do we go? We can't act together. We can't debate. We can't defend positions.
And like, what does democracy at that point mean? It just kind of becomes completely arbitrary. It's just like we're just, you know.
But even not just intersubjectively, but subjectively, telling people like you actually have to think things through is important. Like you as an individual have to think it through.
Yeah. Imagine we actually have to have this convo. You have to think. You can't just be like not good and like you're like, dude, it's that guy, by the way, that guy was just total monkey. That guy's insane. Like I can't deal with that kind of person. Like I mean, it's just I just love this like attempt to like just make their bullshit more highbrow by appealing to Edmund Burke. You know? But it's just nonsense, dude. You just want to not like Muslim people, just, like, and just leave it at that. Yeah, poor Indian guy had to take the brunt of the attack. Why can't you have a representative not from the U.S.? What's wrong with that? People vote for them. What's the problem? What do you want them to look like?
Well, we know what they do, but
we know what he wants to look like. Yeah.
Well, now they want to kick all Chinese students out of the country, don't they?
Yeah.
There goes half my school. Like half of the like graduate program in physics, you know, there goes like the best students. We'd be fucked, dude. Nothing would get done.
It's just absolutely ridiculous.
It really is. I mean, yeah, you showed me something where they wanted to kick out Xi Jinping's daughter.
Yeah, because she goes to Columbia.
No, she goes to Harvard, right?
Oh, is it Harvard?
I think it's Harvard. Yeah.
Yeah.
She goes to one of the highfalutin schools, and yeah, they're like they do understand that would be like a diplomatic crisis to just like deport.
Well, I think that she's already back in China right now, from what I heard.
Oh, okay.
They smuggled her out.
They smuggled her out, bro. How are they going to even? Do they realize what they're saying? Oh, it was Laura Loomer.
Yeah,
who
Laura
said
Loomer.
That.
Yeah.
She's
Wasn't there a rumor that she was like banging Trump or something like that?
I've heard that.
I believe it.
Yeah, I do believe it too.
The image is repulsive.
Or whatever she's injecting into her lips is making its way up to her brain.
For real, dude. It's
Botox is a neurotoxin.
That's what prejudice is, guys. Just very silicon, just clogging your fucking the blood vessels in your brain. That's prejudice, man.
Loomered.
Yeah.
Loomered.
You remember when we all thought like, oh man, he's definitely gonna like. Laura Loomer was like, yeah, I love Trump. We all thought Trump was gonna lose. Well, I don't know if we all thought he was gonna lose, but we were pretty convinced that at least I was, that he was cooked, and that yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then Laura Loomer was around and we were like, yeah, he's definitely cooked if this is the one lady. Like,
yeah, I don't know. I kept going back and forth. I was, like
Me too. I don't want to claim I had a solid prediction one way or the other. I didn't. I wasn't surprised.
The fact that it was so ambiguous should have suggested that something was seriously wrong.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. But one thing I will say is that Laura Loomer being like one of his big like political hitman, I was like, he's cooked, bro.
Yeah, but that's the thing is like you have this like gang of just like degenerate idiots who like have no real good ideas, no intelligent things to say. They just appeal to people's prejudices and the people's stupid intuitions, but they are able to get people out to vote and to whip up and it's an atomized mob. It's not it's not like a social collectivity of
it really is like, but
it is
a mob.
It is a kind of a movement.
It's like it's a rabble in that sense, in the sense that it's not like a coherently congealed social agent, right, with an understanding of its goals and its and of the world around it. It's just like, I don't like those guys. That's it.
Yeah, and it's not just the irrationality though, because in some sense that base irrationality has always been there, but it's also now this intellectualization of that irrationality, which has basically made everything worse, including the operation of like the administration, because people no longer think things through. Like there were people who were thinking things through in the Trump 1 term, and were like trying to keep things running, and those people don't exist anymore.
No,
for the most part.
They're like, my forefathers want me to declare trade war on them.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I don't think that's what prejudice affords you in terms of like yeah.
You know, my forefather Henry Carey handed me down this trade policy from the American system, guided me by the great wisdom of Lyndon LaRouche.
Yeah. Nothing's got to get his LaRouche moment in.
I'm saying, like, a lot of the tariff stuff actually is kind of LaRouchian economic policy, funny enough. Like,
you give Donald enough time.
Give me enough time and I will make a LaRouche reference.
He will make a LaRouche reference, and he will somehow show you that, and in fact, the LaRouche influence is bigger than you thought. So is there any other, should we watch another dumb video? Did we?
There is this, you know, there's this guy Lomez on Twitter who was kind of like a big right-wing poster.
Hell yeah, put it on.
And but now, like, he's like a big guy now. Like, he started this, we talked about it a little bit in another episode. It's called Passage Press.
Yeah.
They publish like H.P. Lovecraft and the Hardy Boys, but they also publish like Yarvin and like but
all right, those guys.
Voice is just like, yo, that's true. Listen, that's true American culture. Two weird blonde kids running around solving worthless crimes. Like, it's the dumbest.
Literature for actual mongoloids.
Yeah, it's like the dumbest shit ever, dude. Like,
but he was basically a Twitter Nazi, but he started his like little fascist like imprint, and he like hosted like the inauguration ball for like the Trump inauguration.
Oh, yeah.
And now now Ross Douthat, the like resident like rightoid on the New York Times staff, is like interviewing him. And he's like kind of like trying to theorize this like new irrationalist philosophy for the right. And he has like
it's worth maybe at some point, Donald, I think that it's something that we're gonna have to do at some point, is just kind of like read these people's gibberish. And I mean,
yeah, at some point I think we'll have to read Bronze Age Pervert, maybe.
Like how
I started reading that. I got like halfway through or something. It's interesting. It's a very perfect encapsulation both of like the Nietzschean kind of reaction and like going beyond aristocratic values, but also just really hating your dad.
What is his dad?
His dad was a communist, right?
Yeah, he was.
Damn.
And some Yarvin was from a communist family too, right?
I thought he was more
so.
like a left-lib dude. No,
I think I read it somewhere that
he's a red diaper baby. Oh damn, he's a red diaper baby. Oh man, this is the greatest failure of the CP.
Weren't they like New York, like Jews, basically? You know?
Yeah, they were New York CP Jews.
Oh man.
And I think they got involved in the civil service. So he's like, yeah, McCarthy was right.
They were like government bureaucrats.
Oh man, they sound like cool people.
Yeah, no, I
like awesome people. Like
his family seems cooler than he was.
Have you noticed he always wears that dumb leather jacket?
Yeah, he's so lame,
dude. Like, who are you?
Do you even drive a motorcycle, dude?
Yeah, like he wears like that dumb leather jacket and like dumb leather boots and jeans. It's like the same look every time.
It's like a cartoon character, the same outfit.
I know, man. It's like a Scooby-Doo character.
But yeah, this guy Lomez, he's like he was like an English professor, but then he got like doxxed and exposed as like
right. Anyone who's old enough to remember the Trump who existed before he became a politician remembers the tabloid fixture, the reality TV star, the self creator whose life is in a weird way its own kind of work of American popular art. But you've written a bunch about Trump as a heroic figure. You've explicitly compared him to Aeneas, speaking of sort of mythological heroes. Talk to me about that, Trump as hero. What does that mean?
Okay, I have a somewhat idiosyncratic view of Donald Trump. As a kind of a man out of time. And so I wrote this article or essay called Aeneas in Washington. And the idea was that Donald Trump has revived or assumed, really, this kind of mythic stature. He's a mythic hero. And specifically, I have this concept, it's not my concept, but I've applied it to Trump of retrocausality. Trump has this strange ability, in my view, to sort of reconstitute the past. How we understand Trump and his life before he entered politics is not a sort of strict linear thing that is unchanging in time. Actually, over the last 5 years in particular. So since he lost the 2020 election, this interim period where he was beset by these lawsuits, and he was threatened with prison time, and he was shot at and nearly killed, we can look back at his past and see a new narrative about his life that suggests the possibility of this kind of rebirth from this civilizational exhaustion that I think is really the sort of core description of our present moment. Now, in this essay, I also point out this concept called charisma hunger, and there was a sociologist from the middle 20th century, Erik Erikson, quite prominent, and he had this idea that in the modern world, and this has a lot to do with actually the loss of sort of religious conviction and religious life, that we were in search of these figures, these heroes. I'm very aware of the possibility that I am succumbing to this charisma hunger that Erikson identified decades ago. And nonetheless, I do think, and I think the people's reaction to Trump, their impression of him. I saw for the other day, did you see this wrestler who won the NCAA title? Yeah. And he's draped in the American flag, this gladiator, and he gives this great big hug to Donald Trump. And in so many ways, Trump is this kind of great father of the American people, or a certain segment of the American people who have embraced him. And he's not just a politician. He's not just a president. He's not just a TV star. And to my mind, that speaks to this mythical character.
Donald, can you pause?
Yeah, I mean, look, my own...
Pause it.
Donald Trump is a scumbag real estate slumlord who has ripped off basically everyone he's worked with, works with the mob, bangs busted porn stars. It's like a total sleazeball. Like the sleaziest guy imagine that guy and then give him $1 billion. That's what Donald Trump is.
That apparently makes him Aeneas.
He's like he's the drug dealer you had to deal with before weed was legal.
Yeah.
That weird guy who hung out with 15-year-olds and ranted 3 hours about his child support payments and wouldn't leave you alone and gave you vodka and it's just weird. You know what I'm saying? Imagine giving that guy $1 billion. That's Donald Trump as a spiritual being. And the fact that he's trying to it's like squaring, it's like, what is the expression? Fitting a square.
Squaring a circle?
Yeah, that's what he's trying to do, really. Because he's not heroic at all. He's not mythic. He's the most selfish, corrupt, idiotic, self-interested moron that has come onto the national scene in I don't know how long. I mean, it's just what world is this guy inhabiting? He really wants it to be the case. That's what I think. Mm-hmm. I can see you looking at a Mussolini and thinking that, I mean, fuck Mussolini, don't get me wrong. But El Duce had some, he had some riz, he had some swag. This guy, he's a fucking sleazebag. He's sleazy. It's so obvious.
But that is there is something in American culture that's kind of traits that you described are kind of encoded in American culture almost as heroic, because there's so many movies where gangsters are protagonists, right?
Yeah.
So there is a sense in which Trump can take up with all these horrible qualities that we rightfully see as the opposite of heroic, but because of kind of how American culture has kind of degraded, I guess, Trump can kind of take up these awful qualities and be seen as a heroic figure who can reverse civilizational decline.
Well, it's not just the American culture aspect. It's specifically the theoretical project that these guys have been involved with has been trying to lay the ground for someone to play this role, right? They're desperate for it, and this is the best they've gotten. And but the fact that they've developed this intellectual like project to do this has also like make them uniquely vulnerable to when like your like Führer is a bit of a schmuck and doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Well, I mean that also happened the first time. It tends to actually happens more often than not because people who are like really think things through tend not to put themselves in that position. So
no, it's so let's try to associate some without getting into a rigorous definition of what is heroic. There are certain qualities you associate with heroism. What's the first one that comes to mind for you guys?
Well, self-sacrifice.
Self-sacrifice. The other one is also like
I just think it's
pitting yourself against great odds.
Yeah.
The way that I would put it is it's like extreme self-actualization, like a person of pure will, more or less.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Trump is kind of that in the sense that he's got no brain. So it is pure will.
Well, here's the thing. I think it's less that he's a hero, and it's more like the charisma thing, where because politics has become so devoid of anything resembling, like, for lack of a better word, spirit. That's why these people who are sort of come across as charismatic tend to do so well, precisely because people attach their own sort of feelings of, well, I'm a loser in this world, and look, he's not a loser.
Well, he's quote unquote pure activity.
I mean, he doesn't seem to have any barriers to what he would like to do.
Yeah, he's literally like the most unhinged person that I can think of in the world.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like, okay, that's really what they're responding to. It's a like, if you want to know what the inverted mirror image of that is for the liberals, it's Barack Obama.
Kind of.
Because Barack Obama is the same sort of thing in the sense that there's no substance to Obama. All there really is the fact that he was good looking and
personality.
Right. It could, like, it talk his
it's pure. It's a pure charisma politics. It's just charismatic authority, right? But I mean,
it's also not a coincidence that he comes right after Obama.
And I wonder what's going to be next, right? No substance, all charisma. But even then, just despicable. So I don't understand this. It's worth. Donald, maybe as part of what we write about, we can write a response to this like characterization of Trump as heroic and talk about like what genuine heroism would look like in 21st century capitalism, because it's my belief that a genuine heroism would be about fighting the class struggle.
Right.
Those who have,
I think like with Trump,
lives.
Like I think with Trump, there is like, the fact that he like, he went against all odds and stood up against the Republican establishment and was nonconformist or whatever. But like, that's even overstated. So
they just didn't like that he was what I said, a sleazebag.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't like that he went against kind of
taxes, and they're like, okay, that's good.
But in the end, all the Christians got on board with him anyway. So it's not even like he challenged that much anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. If anything, I guess you could characterize. I think Sanders is more. Well, no, he's kind of a tragic figure, right?
Actually,
he kind of got like cut down real quick. But there is more of a heroic quality to his kind of insurgency within the Democratic Party that and then he quickly got pacified. Yeah, it's like a martyrdom. I think that's kind of how he probably sees it too. Like myself, so
anyway, Nicholas had to head out. So.
Well, it was good having him. We thank him for coming on.
But we should probably wrap up soon.
Yeah, let's wrap up. How was that was a long stream. Good job.
Yeah, no, we've done good. One thing I wanted to talk about before we close was about you guys see the whole controversy with Radiohead and
yeah, dude. Are we all big Radiohead fans here?
I like Radiohead. I liked them more when I was younger, but I don't really listen to them at all anymore. So it wasn't really like a big deal for me,
I'm in the same boat, honestly.
I mean, I think I love Radiohead. It's like
I listened to them a lot more than when I was younger. But Tom York is a dickhead.
Yeah, they're horrible.
Yeah, he is a real dickhead, and it's really Johnny Greenwood, the guitarist, is like really the big Zionist, I think.
Yeah, he's
Which
married.
is a shame because he's the best musician in the band.
Yeah, he's pretty right wing in a lot of different ways, apparently. But
I think he's married to an Israeli too, right?
Yeah, and I think someone in her family died in the war in Gaza recently. So
insane.
Yeah, died in the genocide on the other side of the genocide. It's literally that stupid joke. What is it like? Oh, my family died in the I have a family member died in the Holocaust. He fell out of the guard tower.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's probably what it was. I mean,
yeah, basically. So Radiohead. I think you can look up the statement and see what it says. It's very much.
It's a horrendous statement.
Well, isn't it like both sides?
Not only does he both sides it, but he spends more than half of it bitching about the fact that people were bitching at him. About
Yeah.
That's not heroic. Complaining.
The opposite of heroic. Like so he makes himself out to be the main victim. Like he says, like, okay, finally, like after all you people have been so mean to me and harassed me for so long, I have to say something. Netanyahu is bad and he has killed too many people. But Hamas. And then he goes on his long rant about how Hamas are bad, and then it's like
13 pages of,
and then it's like, and this is why peace, love, and understanding is so important. And it's just like, oh my god, like.
So it basically was just kind of what you would assume from like a dumb, like British millionaire.
He was also very careful to isolate it to Netanyahu's administration.
Yeah, this is a great rhetorical trick that they, even though the majority of Israeli society is like on board and participating actively, and all the political parties are into it, it somehow is just Netanyahu.
Well, definitionally, he's a Zionist.
Yeah,
because the whole purpose of the statement was to dissolve the Zionist project as such.
Yeah, which is not possible. Great band.
Fuck, I love it.
Listen, I'm not a Radiohead, at least musically. Like, I'm not a hater. Like, I think, like, I'm kind of.
I love Radiohead. I mean, OK Computer.
Yeah, OK Computer is a really good album. Kid A is a really good album. Like, I can't deny that. Like
shit, bro. Hail to the Thief is the shit.
They made some very interesting music.
They made amazing music. Like maybe for me, like my favorite band, maybe even of the '90s. I'm sure someone could. Yeah, I think that might actually be the case. I love them. I listen to them so much. I think in high school, probably the two bands I listened to the most were Meshuggah and Radiohead, which is like the most like oppositely like the most random combo. But
no, because they're both kind of progressive rock in a way, different ends of progressive rock. Just the more technical like metal side of it, than the more like art rock.
But I still listen to Meshuggah a lot, and I don't really listen to.
But Roger Waters had a pretty good clapback at Tom York.
See, that's another band, Pink Floyd. Whenever, like, I'm kind of over boomer rock. I don't know about y'all. Like, I can't stand it anymore.
I go on about Frank Zappa all the time.
Yeah, but that's different. That's different. Like Frank Zappa, Soft Machine, Alan Holdsworth, and like Pink Floyd. Like those are like some of that's like boomer rock that for me is more time. Like it's kind of than like a Led Zeppelin, which I'm like, at this point, I'm kind of like, whatever.
Yeah, I'm pretty bored of Led Zeppelin.
Exactly. Like when he was like, not everyone can write Stairway to Heaven. I'm like, it's not.
No, I think Roger Waters from Pink Floyd, like he's an example of like a boomer, like British rock star who's actually like
goated
based. Yeah. Who's actually like not like who has good politics.
Pull up his statement. I'm curious.
Yeah, hold on. Let me pull it up real quick.
Yeah, Roger Waters has been a great ally of Palestinian people.
A few years ago to go and play, which they did a few years ago when I wrote to Tom York and made the case for observing the picket line and observing the cultural boycott and not going when they were going to go a few years ago to go and play, which they did, and they went and played in Tel Aviv. Mm-hmm. And he sent me back a slightly snide kind of answer, trying to be funny, and clever and whatever. And so I wrote a reply, but I showed it to somebody who knows it. And they said, don't send that. That'll go way over his head. And also, it'll upset him because you're suggesting that it might be the wrong thing to do to cross the picket line and that he's wrong and you're right about something. And there's no way. You need to put on kid gloves and blah, 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 blah. So I did. I wrote him a sort of email that went, I'm sorry if you thought I was being confrontational and blah, 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 blah. Right. And he wrote back and he said, normally people on the other side of an argument at least have the decency or the grace or the something to have a conversation. So then I wrote him back and I said, Tom, we the people in BDS would love to have been trying to have a conversation with you for months, and so have I, and we would love to have a conversation at some time. So when you say that they won't have a conversation, that they just throw shit at you from far away, that is not true. It's a porky pie, my son. People have been trying to talk to you and you will not speak to any of it. Anyway, the exchange goes on quite a long time.
Yeah.
But
why did it end?
That the guy's a complete prick. And he is, obviously. But I think he's damaged. He's very damaged, you know. He's obviously very, very deeply insecure. He's obviously thinks he's very bright, but he's not. So he can't listen to the voice of it. So he can't actually have a conversation. That's why he then did an interview with Rolling Stone where he accused me and Ken Loach, the great British film director, and Brian Eno of being cowards.
Wow.
Yeah.
For what?
What?
I don't know. You'll have to look at the exchange.
Okay, now you have to send it to me.
It says BDS, and anybody who has anything to do with BDS is cowardly and shameful.
Why?
Oh, okay. See, this is amazing. I love when people twist and invert reality, because Johnny Greenwood, he's married to an Israeli artist. Yeah. Johnny Greenwood performed in Tel Aviv this year. You mentioned 2016 Radiohead performed. Johnny Greenwood issued this frankly bizarre statement back in June where he said it's unprogressive actually to support BDS, to actually urge artists to not work with each other. That's very unprogressive, Roger. And so no art is as important as stopping the death and suffering around us. How could it be? But doing nothing seems a worse option. So Roger, what does he say in solution to doing nothing? He says silencing Israeli artists for being born Jewish in Israel doesn't seem like a way to reach an understanding between the two sides of this apparently endless conflict.
Yeah, well,
so
it's complete bullshit. Obviously, there is no argument to be made. There is the oppressed and the oppressor. The oppressed are the indigenous people of Palestine. The oppressor are the settler colonial visitors from North America and North Europe. That's one thing. Okay. The oppressed are murdering. The oppressors are murdering all the oppressed people so they can steal their furniture and their houses and their olive trees and their hills and their streams and their water and their land and their birthright. There is nothing difficult to understand. It is not a conflict. It is a genocide, Tom and Johnny, and you are supporting it. We must ban Israel from all international soccer at club level and international level. We must ban them from Eurovision. They should never have been in Eurovision anyway. Israel isn't in Europe. What is all that about? That's complete nonsense. But Israel must be banned. It has to be sent to Coventry. It is a rogue state, and it is a murderous, genocidal rogue state. This is nothing against Jews. I've got nothing against Judaism. I have nothing against Jewish people at all. I'm talking about the genocidal rogue state of Israel.
I mean, that's what's so particularly egregious and offensive, I think, to anyone with a brain, Roger, to be told that it's actually unprogressive to support the cultural boycott of Israel, and that we're the idiots, right? We're the cowards. Because what's really progressive and brave is just acting like yeah, we could just work with Israelis and just pretend like, oh, this is
Yeah,
just a seemingly endless conflict. Oh, they'll be fighting forever. But we should just join up, kumbaya, and let's all just hold hands and pretend like there's not an ethnic cleansing campaign. Let's pretend that Zionism is not fundamentally a genocidal ideology.
And next year, Johnny Greenwood, you and your Israeli wife can go and buy a seaside apartment in Gaza and live with the other settlers there. And good luck getting to sleep, you.
I agree with his assessment of Tom York.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, yeah. I don't know what else is there to say.
Why even bother, though? I mean, you're not going to convince those people. Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, you're not. You're just not. It's it is kind of Kafkaesque where they can the position that the ruling class supports and violently enforces is somehow
the progressive
is somehow brave, like taking the ruling class.
It's so ridiculous,
and taking the maligned, repressed point of view is cowardly. Okay, man, sure, that's great.
What do you expect from a bunch of guys from Oxford?
Yeah, dude. Dude.
Well, I mean, Roger Waters is, he's a privileged guy. He wasn't exactly. I guess he had family who was communist, so maybe he lucked out.
Yeah, but yeah. If you know anything about the family background of like these people, they don't come. I mean, they're privileged.
Radiohead is also a good band. It's pretty shallow, man. I'm sorry. Like, it's not really that. Like, the music itself is complex and whatnot, but it's never thematically been rich.
It's actually really funny how
Pink Floyd, it is thematically rich.
Yeah, I will say, like, people make fun of like The Wall for being like, oh, it's just like too deep for you, bro. But like, it's actually a pretty like, I mean,
thematically it's rich, man. And
yeah, there's actually a lot of interesting ideas going on in there.
Animals is also a rich album.
Yeah,
like Adam Hartmother is a rich album.
Well, it's actually funny that Tom York got known for being a particularly political person, because if you've heard any of his interviews, he has no idea what the fuck he's talking about. Whatsoever.
No. His politics are always just kind of like the surface level, like consumerism's bad, man.
Yeah, bro.
Like they got a lot of credit for like doing the album In Rainbows. I remember when that came out, like you got to like name your own price.
Right. Yeah.
Download. So that was seen as like this kind of revolutionary like act against consumerism.
Sure. No, I'm gonna give him $0.
Yeah, I mean that's what I did. I downloaded it for free.
I downloaded it for free.
Bro. That is such a. If it were a musician who were not as rich, I wouldn't do that. But
yeah.
I was already illegally downloading music anyway. But that was a good album too when it came out. Like,
it's a really good album.
Yeah, but
okay, guys. Let's wrap it up.
But yeah, I think that's it for today, guys. Fuck Tom York. Let's let me find a cool little clip to play, and we can call it a day.
500. Yeah, The Wall is. I saw The Wall in Belgium, like Roger Waters performing it. Like The Wall.
Oh, nice.
It was just like the best concert I've ever been to. It was just like,
oh yeah, no, it's about a rock star through his narcissism devolving into fascism, which is kind of reminds me of a certain rock star that Roger Waters is beefing with. All right, and maybe a stretch, but maybe not.
I'd never considered them rock stars. I don't know. They don't have that like swag.
I guess. I don't know. Are there even rock stars after the 1970s?
Yeah, exactly. 500's right. I'm not going to give him the credit there.
Hold on. What did he say? Not going to give Radiohead the credit.
Diddy.
Ew. Diddy, bro. We'll have to. Well, Donald, you'll probably be the one who gets to conspiracy speed on all that stuff. Right?
Oh God, I don't even know where to begin on Diddy.
The conspiracies of
don't
Diddy,
rob my
so
brain.
Many.
Don't rob my brain even more.
I don't know much about Diddy, to be honest.
For the truth.
Yeah, maybe.
All right, let's go, Lil Pump.
How the fuck you expect me to